In the churning depths of the warp, where reality bends to the whims of pure emotion and thought, Tzeentch stands as perhaps the most enigmatic of the four great chaos gods. Unlike his brothers who feast upon the raw brutality of war, the decay of entropy, or the excess of sensation, the architect of fate draws his power from something far more subtle yet equally pervasive: the mortal drive for change, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge that should remain forbidden. The birth of Tzeentch cannot be pinned to a single cataclysmic event, unlike some of his fellow chaos gods. Instead, his emergence from the roiling psychic maelstrom of the warp represents the gradual coalescence of countless mortal hopes, dreams, and schemes across millions of years of galactic history. Every time a primitive human looked up at the stars and wondered what lay beyond their world, every moment a Xenos scientist pushed the boundaries of understanding into dangerous territory, every instance of a politician weaving elaborate plots for power, these fragments of psychic energy fed the growing consciousness that would become the changer of ways. The ancient war in heaven between the Necrons and the Old Ones certainly contributed to the psychic turbulence that helped birth all the Chaos Gods, but Tzeentch's origins stretch far beyond this single conflict. Where Khorne gorged himself on the violence of that war and Nurgle fed on the despair and decay that followed, Tzeentch consumed something more fundamental: the very desire for transformation that drove both sides to seek ever more powerful weapons and forbidden technologies. The Old Ones' experiments with the younger races, their manipulation of the warp itself, and the Necrons' pursuit of biotransference all carried the seeds of change and ambition that would eventually coalesce into the Lord of Change. What makes Tzeentch unique among the Chaos Gods is his embodiment of concepts that are not inherently destructive. Hope, after all, is what drives civilizations to reach for the stars. Ambition pushes individuals to better themselves and their circumstances. The pursuit of knowledge has led to countless medical breakthroughs, technological advances, and artistic achievements throughout galactic history. Yet within the twisted realm of chaos, these noble aspirations become corrupted into something far more sinister. The architect of fate represents change in its purest, most uncontrolled form. Where mortals might seek gradual improvement or calculated risks, Tzeentch embodies transformation without restraint or consideration for consequence. His influence turns the scholar's healthy curiosity into an obsession with forbidden lore that drives them to madness. The politician's reasonable ambition becomes a web of schemes so complex that even the schemer loses track of their original goals. The hopeful dreamer's vision of a better tomorrow transforms into a nightmare of constant, unpredictable mutation. This fundamental nature manifests in every aspect of Tzeentch's being. His physical form, when he deigns to take one, shifts constantly, a writhing mass of ever-changing flesh, feathers, and eyes that never settles into a single configuration for more than moments. His voice speaks in multiple tones simultaneously, each offering different versions of the same information, layered with meanings within meanings. Even his most basic interactions with reality carry the seed of transformation, as his presence alone can cause spontaneous mutation in nearby matter. The realm of Tzeentch within the warp reflects this chaotic nature. The crystal labyrinth stretches across impossible dimensions, its walls formed from crystallized time and space that constantly reshape themselves. Paths that lead to specific destinations one moment will transport travelers to entirely different locations the next. The very architecture defies comprehension, with stairs that climb downward, doors that open into themselves, and chambers that exist in multiple places simultaneously. This is not mere decoration or theatrical display. It represents the fundamental impossibility of imposing order on pure change. Within this realm, Tzeentch weaves his countless schemes. Unlike the straightforward approach of his brother Chaos Gods, the architect of fate operates through layers of manipulation so complex that even his most devoted followers rarely understand their true purpose. A single plan might span millennia and involve the rise and fall of entire civilizations, all to achieve a goal that serves another scheme, which itself feeds into a greater design. The beauty and horror of Tzeentch's machinations lie not in their immediate effects but in their interconnected complexity, a web of cause and effect that stretches across time and space. The relationship between Tzeentch and mortal ambition runs deeper than simple corruption. The changer of ways understands that hope and the desire for betterment are among the most powerful forces in the galaxy. A desperate parent will make any bargain to save their child. A struggling artist will accept any patron to see their vision realized. A failing leader will embrace any strategy to avoid defeat. These moments of vulnerability, when mortals reach beyond their current circumstances toward something better, create openings that Tzeentch exploits with masterful precision. The corruption rarely appears as corruption at first. The knowledge offered seems genuinely helpful. The mutations appear as improvements. The schemes promise realistic benefits. A planetary governor struggling with rebellion might receive visions of a new administrative system that could bring peace, only to discover that implementing it requires increasingly questionable compromises. A tech priest seeking to improve their Forge world's output might stumble upon ancient SDC patterns that work perfectly, each success building confidence until they're manufacturing technologies that blur the line between machine and demon. This subtle approach extends to Tzeentch's relationship with his fellow Chaos gods in the eternal Great Game. Where Khorne's rivalry with Slaanesh plays out in obvious opposition, martial discipline against hedonistic excess, Tzeentch's conflicts operate on multiple levels simultaneously. His most fundamental opposition comes from Nurgle, the Lord of Decay, whose domain represents everything Tzeentch abhors: stagnation, acceptance of current circumstances, and the embrace of entropy over transformation. The conflict between change and stagnation manifests across countless battlefields, both literal and metaphorical. Where Nurgle's plagues bring resignation and the comfort of inevitable decay, Tzeentch offers the promise of transformation and escape. A world ravaged by the destroyer hive might find salvation in mutagenic treatments that cure the disease but leave the population fundamentally altered. A civilization facing extinction might receive the knowledge to transcend their physical limitations, becoming something that can no longer be called human. The rivalry plays out in laboratories where scientists choose between accepting death and embracing radical transformation, in political chambers where leaders decide between managing decline and risking everything on revolutionary change. Yet Tzeentch's manipulations of Khorne and Slaanesh demonstrate his more subtle approach to the Great Game. Rather than opposing them directly, he often seeks to redirect their energies toward his own purposes. A war that serves Khorne's hunger for blood might be prolonged or redirected through carefully placed intelligence, turning a simple conflict into a complex campaign that achieves multiple objectives. Slaanesh's cults might find themselves pursuing increasingly esoteric pleasures that require forbidden knowledge to achieve, unknowingly serving Tzeentch's goals while satisfying their own desires. The architect of fate's influence on these manipulations never appears heavy-handed. A single misdelivered message might delay reinforcements just long enough for a battle's outcome to shift. An ambitious officer might receive a promotion that places them in position to make a crucial decision months later. A pleasure cult might discover that their newest indulgence requires rare components that can only be obtained through contact with a particular scholar, who happens to be researching exactly the sort of forbidden lore that Tzeentch wishes to see unleashed. This approach reflects Tzeentch's understanding that the most effective changes appear to arise naturally from existing circumstances. Rather than imposing transformation from outside, he creates conditions where mortals choose change themselves, believing they're acting according to their own desires and rational calculations. The scholar who uncovers dangerous knowledge thinks they're advancing understanding. The politician who embraces increasingly complex schemes believes they're serving their constituents. The artist who incorporates impossible geometries into their work sees themselves as pushing creative boundaries. The true horror of Tzeentch's influence lies not in obvious corruption, but in this perversion of legitimate aspirations. Hope becomes obsession, ambition transforms into megalomaniacal scheming, and the pursuit of knowledge leads to truths that shatter sanity. The victims often retain enough of their original motivations to believe they're still serving their initial goals, even as they perform acts that would have horrified their former selves. The planetary governor who began by seeking peace for their world might end up sacrificing entire cities to fuel rituals they believe will bring ultimate harmony. The scholar who started with genuine curiosity might become convinced that unleashing demonic entities serves the cause of advancing knowledge. This corruption of noble impulses extends throughout Tzeentch's hierarchy of servants. His greater demons, the Lords of Change, embody this principle in their very existence. These towering creatures combine immense intellect with an alien understanding of causality that allows them to perceive and manipulate probability itself. When a Lord of Change intervenes in mortal affairs, the results often appear as remarkable coincidences or strokes of fortune rather than obvious supernatural interference. A key witness might happen to be elsewhere when needed testimony could prevent a war. A crucial document might be misfiled at exactly the moment its contents could expose a conspiracy. A promising young leader might suffer an accident that removes them from play, just as their influence could have stabilized a region. The lesser demons of Tzeentch operate according to similar principles, though their interventions tend toward more direct transformation. Horrors split and merge in battles that serve multiple purposes simultaneously, weakening enemies while creating conditions for future schemes. Flamers of Tzeentch burn away not just flesh but certainty itself, leaving survivors changed in ways that extend far beyond physical mutation. Screamers tear through reality itself, creating rifts that allow carefully timed interventions in distant locations. The realm of Tzeentch exists as perhaps the most bewildering domain within the warp, a dimension where the very concept of physical law becomes meaningless. The crystal labyrinth stretches across impossible distances, its boundaries shifting between dimensions that mortal minds cannot properly comprehend. Unlike the brass citadels of Khorne or the plague gardens of Nurgle, Tzeentch's domain actively resists any attempt at mapping or understanding its structure. The crystalline formations that give the realm its name are not merely decorative. They represent crystallized moments of time and possibility, frozen into semi-solid form, yet constantly reshaping themselves according to patterns that follow no earthly logic. The walls of the labyrinth rise in spiraling towers that twist through dimensions, their surfaces reflecting not light but potential futures and forgotten pasts. These crystal formations pulse with internal luminescence that shifts through spectrums beyond mortal perception, casting shadows that move independently of their sources. The very ground beneath visitors' feet consists of compressed layers of crystallized thought and emotion, creating a surface that responds to the mental state of those who walk upon it. A confident demon might find solid footing on paths that would crumble beneath the uncertain steps of a mortal intruder. Navigation through the crystal labyrinth proves impossible through conventional means. Corridors that lead north might deposit travelers in locations that existed centuries in the past, while doorways that appear to open onto familiar chambers instead reveal vistas of alien worlds that may never come to exist. The architecture itself participates in Tzeentch's schemes, with staircases that climb downward into higher floors and passages that loop through themselves without creating paradox. Bridges span chasms filled with swirling temporal energy, their spans constructed from solidified causality that allows crossing between cause and effect. The most disorienting aspect of the realm's geography lies in its treatment of scale and proportion. Chambers that appear modest from outside contain vast halls that stretch beyond the horizon, while enormous gateways might open onto cramped spaces barely large enough for a single occupant. This distortion extends to time as well. A journey that feels like moments might span decades in real space, while expeditions that seem to last for years might conclude before they began. The labyrinth's inhabitants navigate these impossibilities through understanding rather than memory, following routes that exist more as concepts than as physical paths. Within this maze of crystallized possibility stands the Hidden Library, one of Tzeentch's most significant strongholds, and perhaps the most dangerous repository of knowledge in existence. The library's exterior appears as a massive crystalline dome that reflects infinite versions of itself, each reflection showing the structure at different points in its existence. Some reflections reveal the library as it was when first constructed from the dreams of ancient scholars, while others show potential futures where it has grown to encompass entire sectors of the crystal labyrinth. The entrance to the Hidden Library shifts location constantly, appearing appearing as different configurations of doorways, archways, and portals depending on the seeker's intentions and worthiness. Mortals who approach seeking forbidden knowledge might find a simple wooden door marked with scholarly symbols, while those driven by pure curiosity could encounter an elaborate gateway covered in equations that describe the fundamental nature of reality. The library's defenses begin with these entrances. Each portal serves as a test that evaluates the visitor's motivations and capabilities before granting access. Inside, the hidden library defies every convention of architecture and organization. The collection exists across multiple dimensions simultaneously, with reading rooms that occupy the same space as vast storage vaults without creating conflict. Shelves stretch infinitely upward and downward, their contents arranged according to principles that mortal librarians would find incomprehensible. Books that contain knowledge that was never learned sit beside scrolls describing events that have yet to occur. Tomes bound in materials that exist only in theoretical physics occupy the same shelves as tablets carved from crystallized time itself. The organization system follows patterns of meaning and connection rather than alphabetical or chronological order. Works on a particular subject cluster together regardless of when they were written or will be written, creating subject areas that span multiple temporal periods. A researcher seeking information about a specific technology might find themselves in a section containing everything from primitive cave paintings, showing the first sparks of the relevant concept, to detailed technical manuals describing its ultimate perfection millions of years in the future. The guardians of the hidden library consist primarily of lords of change, those greater demons whose vast intellects make them suitable custodians for such dangerous knowledge. These towering beings drift between the stacks on wings that shimmer with mathematical equations, their multiple eyes constantly scanning for unauthorized access attempts or knowledge that threatens to escape containment. Each Lord of Change serves as both librarian and censor, determining which information can be safely accessed and which must remain sealed until the proper moment in Tzeentch's grand design. The Lords of Change do not simply guard the library, they actively participate in its function as a tool of corruption and manipulation. When mortals arrive seeking specific knowledge, these greater demons guide them not necessarily to what they requested, but to what serves Tzeentch's purposes. A tech priest seeking improved weapon designs might be directed to texts on biological enhancement that will lead them down paths of forbidden research. A scholar researching historical events could find themselves reading accounts that are technically accurate, but which reveal connections and patterns that drive them toward increasingly dangerous investigations. Beyond the Lords of Change, the library employs various other demonic entities as staff and security. Horrors of Tzeentch serve as research assistants, their ability to split and merge making them ideal for simultaneously consulting multiple sources. These lesser demons can access different sections of the library at once, cross-referencing information across temporal boundaries and dimensional barriers. Flamers patrol the restricted sections, their warfare capable of burning away not just physical intruders but unauthorized knowledge itself, ensuring that certain information remains contained until the appropriate moment for its release. The most dangerous aspect of the hidden library lies not in its guardians, but in the knowledge it contains. The collection includes not just information that exists or has existed, but knowledge that could exist under different circumstances. Theoretical texts describe technologies that would function only under alternate physical laws, while historical accounts detail events from timelines that were prevented from occurring. This speculative knowledge proves particularly corrupting because it offers solutions to problems that cannot be solved through conventional means, tempting researchers to attempt alterations to reality itself in order to make the impossible knowledge applicable. Deeper within the crystal labyrinth stands the impossible fortress, Tzeentch's primary stronghold, and the center from which he observes and manipulates the skein of fate. The fortress exists as a structure that simultaneously occupies multiple locations and time periods, its towers and battlements appearing in different configurations depending on the observer's perspective and temporal position. From one angle, it might appear as a traditional castle constructed from blue and gold crystal, while from another viewpoint, the same structure reveals itself as an abstract geometric form that exists in 11 dimensions. The fortress serves as Tzeentch's primary observation post for monitoring the countless schemes and plots that span the galaxy. Within its halls, the Architect of Fate maintains vast scrying chambers filled with crystalline viewing devices that can observe events across space and time. These chambers contain not just windows into the present, but viewing portals that show probability cascades, visual representations of how current events might unfold into various potential futures. The walls themselves serve as display surfaces, their crystalline structure allowing Tzeentch to project images of distant worlds, ongoing conspiracies, and developing situations that require his attention. The central chamber of the impossible fortress houses Tzeentch's greatest tool for manipulating fate, the web of destiny. This massive three-dimensional construct appears as an intricate network of crystalline threads that stretch throughout the chamber, each thread representing a different chain of causality. The web responds to Tzeentch's will, allowing him to trace the connections between seemingly unrelated events and identify the precise points where minor interventions can produce major changes. A single touch to one thread might set in motion a sequence of events that leads to the fall of an imperial world centuries later, while adjusting another could ensure that a particular individual is born with the specific combination of traits needed for a future scheme. The manipulation of these threads requires incredible precision and foresight. Tzeentch must account not only for the immediate effects of his interventions, but for the countless secondary and tertiary consequences that ripple outward through time. A decision to delay a particular battle by causing mechanical failures in one side's equipment might prevent thousands of deaths in the short term, but if those deaths were necessary to create the specific emotional conditions needed for a later psychic awakening, the intervention could undermine schemes that depend on that awakening occurring at the proper moment. The fortress also contains planning chambers, where Tzeentch develops his most complex schemes. These rooms exist in a state of temporal flux, allowing the Architect of Fate to experience different versions of the same planning session simultaneously. He can explore multiple approaches to the same problem in parallel, comparing the outcomes of different strategies before committing to a particular course of action. The walls of these chambers display constantly shifting diagrams and charts that track the status of ongoing plots, with connections drawn between events that might be separated by millennia or occur on opposite sides of the galaxy. The nature of time within the crystal labyrinth fundamentally differs from its behavior in real space. Past, present, and future exist as equally accessible states rather than as a linear progression. Visitors to the realm might encounter their own past or future selves, engage in conversations with individuals who died centuries ago, or witness events that have yet to occur. This temporal fluidity serves Tzeentch's purposes by allowing him to coordinate activities across different time periods and ensure that his schemes unfold with perfect timing. The manipulation of causality within the realm extends beyond simple time travel. Tzeentch can create causal loops where effects precede their causes, establish connections between events that have no logical relationship, and even temporarily suspend the law of cause and effect entirely. These abilities allow for schemes of incredible complexity, where the same event might serve multiple purposes across different temporal frameworks. A battle that appears to be a simple territorial dispute in the present might simultaneously serve as the catalyst for a technological breakthrough in the past and the foundation for a religious movement in the future. The realm's treatment of possibility proves equally flexible. Within the crystal labyrinth, potential outcomes exist as semi-real entities that can be observed, manipulated, and even temporarily experienced. Tzeentch maintains chambers filled with crystallized possibilities, events that could have happened under different circumstances, preserved in solid form for study and potential implementation. These possibility crystals serve as raw material for the Architect of Fate schemes, allowing him to introduce elements from alternate timelines into current reality when doing so serves his purposes. The inhabitants of the crystal labyrinth exist in a state of constant flux that reflects their master's nature. Demons of Tzeentch continuously evolve and change, their forms shifting to match their current assignments and the needs of ongoing schemes. A flamer might temporarily develop additional sensory organs when tasked with monitoring a particular location, while a horror could split into specialized forms designed for different aspects of the same mission. This adaptability makes the realm's denizens incredibly effective tools for implementing Tzeentch's complex plans. The lesser demons that populate the labyrinth serve functions that extend far beyond simple combat or intimidation. Screamers of Tzeentch patrol the dimensional boundaries, their ability to tear through reality allowing them to create temporary passages between distant locations. These rifts enable rapid communication and transportation across the realm, ensuring that information and resources can be deployed wherever needed. The Screamers also serve as early warning systems, their psychic screams alerting the fortress to intrusions or unexpected developments that might require Tzeentch's attention. Disc-riding demon heralds carry messages between different sections of the realm, their floating platforms allowing them to navigate the impossible architecture with ease. These messengers do not simply relay information, they serve as mobile nodes in Tzeentch's communication network, capable of processing and analyzing data as they travel. A herald dispatched with a simple status report might return with detailed analysis of how that information affects other ongoing schemes, complete with recommendations for adjustments to current plans. The Crystal Labyrinth also hosts more exotic demon entities that exist nowhere else in the warp. Probability shepherds appear as shifting geometric forms that guide the flow of chance and coincidence throughout the realm. These beings ensure that unlikely events occur with precisely the right frequency to serve Tzeentch's purposes, manipulating random factors to produce outcomes that appear natural but serve specific strategic goals. Timeline weavers exist as temporal entities that can move freely between different chronological periods, serving as agents for schemes that require coordination across multiple time periods. The Demon Legions of Tzeentch represent the most intellectually sophisticated and strategically complex forces within the warp, each entity serving as both warrior and scholar in the architect of fate's endless schemes. Unlike the straightforward brutality of Khorne's bloodletters or the pestilent hordes of Nurgle's plaguebearers, Tzeentch's demonic servants operate through layers of deception, manipulation, and calculated transformation that make them uniquely dangerous opponents on any battlefield. At the apex of this hierarchy stand the Lords of Change, greater demons, whose very presence warps reality around them through sheer psychic magnitude. These towering entities combine the physical power expected of greater demons with intellectual capabilities that rival the greatest mortal scholars and strategists. A Lord of Change typically manifests as a creature standing 4 to 5 times the height of a space marine, its form blending avian and humanoid characteristics in ways that shift constantly according to its current needs and emotional state. Brilliant plumage covers much of their bodies, feathers that shimmer with colors beyond the normal spectrum and bear patterns that hurt mortal eyes to observe directly. The most distinctive feature of any Lord of Change lies in its proliferation of eyes, which appear not just in the expected locations, but scattered across wings, embedded in feathers, and sometimes floating independently around the creature's form. Each eye serves a different function. Some observe the present moment with perfect clarity, others peer into possible futures, and still others examine the past for patterns and connections that might prove useful. The constant movement and independent focus of these organs creates a deeply unsettling effect, as observers realize they are being examined from dozens of perspectives simultaneously. The wings of a Lord of Change serve purposes beyond mere flight. The membrane between the wing bones displays constantly shifting equations, formulae, and diagrams that represent the demon's ongoing calculations and analysis of current situations. These mathematical displays are not mere decoration. They represent active processing of probability matrices, tactical assessments, and strategic planning that occurs continuously during combat and conversation. Experienced opponents learn to watch these wing displays for clues about the demon's intentions, though the information revealed often proves more misleading than helpful. The psychic powers wielded by Lords of Change exceed those of most mortal psychers by several orders of magnitude. These greater demons can reshape local reality through pure force of will, transmuting matter from one state to another, altering the flow of time in localized areas, and creating illusions so convincing that they become temporarily real. Their mastery of divination allows them to perceive multiple potential outcomes for any given situation, enabling them to make tactical decisions based on knowledge of how different approaches might unfold. This prophetic ability makes Lords of Change extraordinarily difficult opponents in direct combat, as they can anticipate and counter enemy actions before those actions are fully committed. In warfare, Lords of Change serve as supreme commanders whose strategic thinking operates on timescales that span decades or centuries. A single Lord of Change might orchestrate a campaign that appears to consist of unrelated skirmishes and political maneuvers spread across multiple star systems, each engagement serving purposes that only become apparent when viewed as part of the greater design. Their approach to military command emphasizes misdirection and the creation of favorable conditions rather than direct application of force. A Lord of Change would rather manipulate enemy commanders into making strategically disastrous decisions than simply destroy their forces through overwhelming firepower. The tactical flexibility of Lords of Change extends to their ability to operate effectively across multiple theaters simultaneously. Through their mastery of scrying and divination, these greater demons can monitor and direct operations on distant worlds while personally leading forces in immediate combat. Their psychic communications networks allow them to coordinate activities across vast distances, ensuring that seemingly independent actions serve unified strategic objectives. This capability makes them particularly dangerous opponents for Imperial forces, whose command structures rely on more conventional communication methods that can be intercepted or disrupted. Beneath the Lords of Change in Tzeentch's hierarchy exist the Horrors, demon entities whose fundamental nature embodies the principle of transformation through division and multiplication. These creatures appear as roughly humanoid figures composed of roiling warp stuff, their forms constantly shifting between semi-solid and purely energetic states. The most commonly encountered variety, pink horrors, stand approximately as tall as human children, but possess strength and resilience far beyond mortal capabilities. Their skin writhes with internal movement, as if composed of liquid fire contained within a flexible membrane, and their faces display expressions of manic glee that never quite seem appropriate to the current situation. Pink horrors serve multiple functions within Tzeentch's forces, operating as both frontline troops and mobile manifestations of chaotic change. In combat, they hurl bolts of warp fire that burn through both physical matter and psychic defenses, their attacks carrying mutagenic properties that can transform victims in unpredictable ways. A soldier struck by horror fire might find their weapon fusing with their hand, their armor growing into their flesh, or their tactical awareness suddenly expanded to encompass strategic considerations they were never trained to understand. These transformations rarely prove immediately fatal, but they invariably render the victim less effective in their original role, while potentially making them useful for entirely different purposes. The true horror of pink horrors becomes apparent when they suffer significant damage or destruction. Rather than simply dying, these demons undergo a process of division that splits them into two blue horrors, smaller but more agile entities that retain the memories and basic personality of their predecessor, while developing distinct individual characteristics. This splitting represents more than simple reproduction. It demonstrates the fundamental principle that destruction of Tzeentchian forces often results in multiplication rather than elimination. A single pink horror destroyed early in a battle might result in dozens of blue horrors by the engagement's end, as each generation splits under pressure. Blue horrors display markedly different temperaments from their pink predecessors, exhibiting morose and pessimistic attitudes that contrast sharply with the manic enthusiasm of pink horrors. This emotional shift reflects their nature as creatures born from destruction, entities that exist as living reminders that even positive change carries the seeds of loss and diminishment. Despite their gloomy dispositions, blue horrors prove equally dangerous in combat, their smaller size allowing them to infiltrate enemy positions and strike from unexpected angles. Their warpfire attacks carry different properties from those of pink horrors, tending to drain energy and enthusiasm from targets rather than causing physical transformation. The division process continues when blue horrors face destruction, each splitting into a pair of brimstone horrors, tiny entities no larger than human infants, but composed entirely of living flame. These smallest demons represent pure destructive potential concentrated into minimal physical form. Brimstone horrors swarm across battlefields like animate sparks, their touch igniting flammable materials, and their presence causing electronic systems to malfunction through electromagnetic interference. While individually weak, they appear in such numbers that they can overwhelm defensive positions through sheer quantity, flowing around obstacles like liquid fire and reforming on the far side. The tactical implications of horror multiplication create unique challenges for enemy commanders. Traditional military doctrine suggests concentrating firepower to eliminate threats quickly, but this approach proves counterproductive against horror formations. Each destroyed pink horror immediately doubles the number of active enemies, while destroyed blue horrors quadruple the count of attacking entities. Experienced Imperial Guard officers learn to contain horror formations rather than destroy them outright, using sustained suppression fire to prevent the demons from advancing, while avoiding the concentrated damage that triggers division. The psychological impact of fighting horrors extends beyond the tactical complications of their multiplication. Soldiers must cope with the realization that their success in eliminating enemies directly increases the number of threats they face. This reversal of normal combat logic creates stress and confusion that can lead to poor decision-making and reduced unit cohesion. The constant cackling of pink horrors, the moaning of blue horrors, and the crackling roar of brimstone horrors creates an audio environment that makes communication difficult and adds to the disorienting nature of combat against these entities. Flamers of Tzeentch represent a more specialized category of demon, entities that exist as living manifestations of mutagenic fire and transformative destruction. These creatures appear as bizarre amalgamations of organic and mechanical components, their bodies consisting of flesh like tubes and chambers that function as biological flame projectors. Multiple limbs ending in nozzle-like appendages allow flamers to direct their attacks with precision, while their central mass contains the organs necessary for generating and storing the warp fire that serves as their primary weapon. The flames produced by these demons differ fundamentally from ordinary fire, carrying properties that affect both physical matter and psychic energy. Flamer fire burns through armor and fortifications with ease, but its more dangerous aspect lies in its ability to ignite change itself. Victims caught in flamer attacks often survive the initial burning, only to discover that the fire has awakened dormant mutations, activated latent psychic abilities, or altered their fundamental nature in ways that become apparent only over time. A soldier who escapes a flamer attack with minor burns might later find themselves developing additional limbs, experiencing visions of impossible mathematics, or discovering an irresistible compulsion to study forbidden texts. In tactical situations, flamers serve as area denial weapons and breakthrough specialists. Their ability to project streams of warp fire across significant distances makes them effective at clearing enemy positions and creating barriers that prevent troop movement. The psychological impact of flamer attacks often proves as valuable as their direct damage, as soldiers who witness the mutagenic effects of the flames become reluctant to advance into areas where flamers might be positioned. This hesitation allows Tzeentch forces to control battlefield geography and channel enemy movements into predetermined killing zones. The mobility of flamers adds another dimension to their tactical utility. These demons can move across difficult terrain with ease, their unusual locomotion allowing them to navigate obstacles that would stop conventional troops. They frequently operate in support of horror formations, using their ranged attacks to soften enemy positions before the horrors close for direct combat. The combination of flamer suppression and horror multiplication creates tactical situations where enemy forces face increasing numbers of opponents while being denied the ability to establish effective defensive positions. Screamers of Tzeentch fulfill the role of fast attack specialists and interdiction forces within demon armies. These entities appear as flying creatures that combine characteristics of manta rays and mechanical aircraft, their flat bodies allowing them to slice through both air and the fabric of reality itself. The leading edges of their wings possess properties that can cut through virtually any material, while their ability to phase partially out of normal space-time allows them to pass through solid obstacles when necessary. The most distinctive capability of Screamers lies in their ability to tear rifts in reality through rapid movement and psychic resonance. When multiple Screamers move in formation, their combined psychic signatures create interference patterns that weaken the barriers between dimensions. This effect allows them to create temporary portals for rapid troop movement, establish communication links across vast distances, and even enable limited time travel effects for small objects or brief messages. Experienced Screamer formations can coordinate their movements to create stable warp rifts that remain open long enough for significant military assets to pass through. In direct combat, Screamers operate as high-speed interceptors and harassment units. Their ability to appear suddenly from unexpected angles makes them particularly effective against enemy aircraft and isolated ground units. The psychic scream that gives them their name serves both as a weapon and a communication method, the sonic attack capable of disrupting enemy electronics while simultaneously coordinating the actions of nearby Tzeentch forces. The scream carries subsonic frequencies that affect mortal psychology, creating feelings of unease and disorientation that reduce combat effectiveness even among troops who suffer no direct physical damage. The interdiction capabilities of Screamers extend to their role in preventing enemy reinforcements and supplies from reaching combat zones. Formations of these demons can establish patrol patterns that effectively blockade entire star systems, their ability to detect and intercept ships traveling through the warp making them invaluable for strategic operations. The psychological impact of Screamer attacks on ship crews often proves as important as the physical damage inflicted, as the otherworldly nature of these entities creates terror that can lead to crew mutinies and command failures. Among the named greater demons of Tzeentch, few command as much attention and fear as Kairos Fateweaver, the Oracle of Tzeentch. This unique Lord of Change possesses two heads that face in opposite directions, one capable of seeing all possible futures, while the other observes all potential pasts. This dual perception grants Kairos prophetic abilities that exceed those of other Lords of Change by several orders of magnitude, making him one of the most strategically valuable entities in Tzeentch's service. The physical form of Kairos reflects his unique nature, with his twin heads displaying markedly different characteristics despite sharing the same body. The forward-facing head appears younger and more vibrant, its eyes bright with the light of infinite possibilities, while the backward-facing head shows signs of age and weariness from witnessing countless tragedies and failures across history. The dichotomy between these aspects creates a being capable of providing advice based on comprehensive knowledge of both what has been and what might yet come to pass. Kairos serves Tzeentch as both oracle and strategic advisor, his predictions guiding the development of schemes that span millennia. His ability to perceive probability cascades allows him to identify the precise moments when minor interventions can produce major changes, making him invaluable for timing critical operations. The Oracle's Council has influenced some of the most significant events in galactic history, though his advice often comes in the form of riddles and paradoxes that require careful interpretation to understand properly. The Changeling represents another category of unique demon, an entity whose mastery of shapeshifting and infiltration makes it one of Tzeentch's most effective agents for operations requiring subtlety and deception. Unlike other demons whose forms remain relatively stable, the Changeling possesses no true appearance, existing as a constantly shifting amalgamation of borrowed characteristics from countless different beings it has impersonated over the centuries. The infiltration capabilities of the Changeling extend far beyond simple physical disguise. This demon can replicate not just the appearance of its targets, but their memories, mannerisms, and even their psychic signatures to a degree that makes detection extremely difficult. The changeling has successfully impersonated imperial officials, space marine commanders, and even other demons, maintaining these deceptions for extended periods while gathering intelligence and manipulating events from within enemy organizations. The strategic value of the changeling lies in its ability to create opportunities for larger operations through careful preparation and positioning. By assuming the identity of key individuals at crucial moments, this demon can ensure that critical decisions favor Tzeentch's interests, that vital information reaches the wrong recipients, or that security measures fail at precisely the right moments. The changeling's operations often remain undetected for years or decades, their effects only becoming apparent when viewed as part of larger patterns of manipulation and control. The origins of the Thousand Sons Legion trace back to the early days of the Great Crusade, when the Emperor's gene forges on Terra produced the 15th Legion from genetic material that would prove both blessing and curse. Even before their reunion with their Primarch, the warriors of this legion displayed an unusual affinity for psychic phenomena that set them apart from their brother legions. Where other Space Marines might experience occasional flashes of prescience or intuitive understanding, the Thousand Sons manifested consistent psychic abilities that ranged from telepathy and telekinesis to more exotic powers involving the manipulation of probability and perception. This psychic predisposition created both advantages and complications for the Legion's early campaigns. Thousand Sun squads could coordinate their actions through telepathic links that made their tactical responses faster and more precise than conventional communication methods allowed. Their librarians developed techniques for psychic reconnaissance that could penetrate enemy defenses and gather intelligence from vast distances. Battle Brothers learned to enhance their physical capabilities through mental discipline, achieving feats of strength and endurance that impressed even veteran Space Marines from other legions. However, these gifts came with inherent dangers that became apparent during the Legion's first major campaigns. Psykers among the Thousand Sons began experiencing episodes of uncontrolled power manifestation, their abilities surging beyond their capacity to contain or direct them. These incidents ranged from minor disruptions like spontaneous telekinetic effects to catastrophic events where Battle Brothers lost control entirely, their psychic energies lashing out indiscriminately at friend and foe alike. The Legion's command structure struggled to develop protocols for managing these occurrences while maintaining operational effectiveness. The discovery of Magnus, the Red on the world of Prospero, provided answers to some questions while raising others that would prove far more troubling. The Cyclops Primarch had been raised by the scholar sorcerers of Prospero, a civilization that had developed sophisticated understanding of psychic phenomena over thousands of years. Unlike most human worlds, Prospero embraced psychers rather than fearing them, creating institutions dedicated to the study and refinement of psychic abilities. The planet's great libraries contained texts on subjects that other worlds considered forbidden knowledge, while its academies trained practitioners in techniques that pushed the boundaries of what mortals could safely attempt. Magnus himself embodied the pinnacle of psychic achievement, his single eye capable of perceiving layers of reality that remained hidden from ordinary vision. His mastery extended across multiple disciplines of psychic practice, from the manipulation of matter and energy to complex divination techniques that allowed him to perceive potential futures with startling accuracy. The Primarch's understanding of the warp exceeded that of most other beings in the galaxy, including many of his brother Primarchs who possessed psychic abilities of their own. When Magnus took command of the Thousand Sons, he implemented training regimens that drew upon Prosperine traditions of psychic education. The Legion's librarians studied at the feet of Prosperine masters, learning techniques that had been refined over millennia of careful practice. Battle Brothers with psychic potential received instruction in mental disciplines that helped them channel their abilities more effectively while reducing the risk of dangerous manifestations. The integration of Prosperine knowledge with Astartes' physiology and training created a unique synthesis that made the Thousand Sons the most psychically capable legion in the Imperial arsenal. The early campaigns of the reunited legion demonstrated the tactical advantages of this psychic mastery. Thousand Sons forces could coordinate complex operations across vast battlefields through telepathic networks that enemy jamming could not disrupt. Their librarians provided intelligence-gathering capabilities that allowed the Legion to anticipate enemy movements and identify weaknesses in defensive positions before conventional reconnaissance could detect them. In several notable engagements, Thousand Sun Psykers turned the tide of battle by manipulating enemy equipment, creating illusions that confused opposing forces, or simply overwhelming enemy Psykers through superior training and technique. Yet even as the Legion achieved victory after victory, disturbing signs began to manifest among its ranks. Battle Brothers reported strange dreams filled with imagery of crystalline labyrinths and impossible geometries. Some warriors began experiencing spontaneous mutations that altered their physical appearance in subtle but noticeable ways, changes in eye color, the development of additional digits, or skin that took on unusual textures or hues. These alterations occurred most frequently among the Legion's most powerful Psykers, suggesting a connection between psychic ability and the mysterious transformations. The mutations initially appeared benign or even beneficial. Warriors who developed enhanced sensory organs found their combat effectiveness improved, while those whose neural structure underwent alteration often displayed increased psychic capabilities. The Legion's apothecaries studied these changes with interest rather than alarm, viewing them as natural evolution of the Astartes form in response to psychic development. Magnus himself showed little concern about the mutations, interpreting them as signs that his sons were transcending the limitations of their original design. This attitude would prove tragically misguided as the mutations began to accelerate and spread throughout the Legion. What had begun as minor alterations gradually developed into more dramatic transformations that affected both physical form and mental stability. Battle Brothers found their flesh reshaping itself according to patterns that followed no biological logic, their bones extending into new configurations, their organs multiplying or merging in ways that defied anatomical understanding. The changes were not random. They followed designs that seemed almost intentional, as if guided by some external intelligence with its own agenda for the Legion's development. The psychological effects of these transformations proved as troubling as the physical changes. Warriors who had once been models of discipline and tactical thinking began displaying erratic behavior, their thought patterns altered by neural modifications they could neither control nor understand. Some developed obsessions with abstract mathematical concepts, spending hours creating elaborate equations that described impossible geometries. Others became fixated on arcane texts, claiming to perceive hidden meanings in passages that appeared mundane to their battle brothers. As the mutations spread, they began to follow patterns that the Legion scholars recognized from ancient Prosperine texts dealing with the most dangerous aspects of warp study. The transformations resembled descriptions of the flesh change, a curse that had afflicted various human populations throughout history when they delved too deeply into psychic phenomena without proper safeguards. The realization that their Legion was succumbing to this ancient affliction sent shockwaves through the Thousand Sons command structure and prompted desperate searches for solutions. Magnus threw himself into research with characteristic intensity, consulting every text in Prospero's vast libraries and reaching out to contacts throughout the galaxy who might possess relevant knowledge. The Primarch's investigations led him into increasingly esoteric areas of study, examining theories about the fundamental nature of mutation and change that pushed the boundaries of what even Prosperine scholars considered safe to explore. His research brought him into contact with entities and concepts that existed at the very edges of human understanding, including knowledge of the Chaos Gods and their domains within the warp. The crisis reached its peak when entire companies of Thousand Sons began succumbing to uncontrolled mutation simultaneously. Warriors who had served with distinction for decades found themselves transforming into creatures that bore little resemblance to their original forms, their Astartes physiology warping into configurations that could no longer support rational thought or coordinated action. The Legion's combat effectiveness plummeted as increasing numbers of battle brothers became casualties not of enemy action, but of their own uncontrolled transformation. Faced with the complete destruction of his Legion, Magnus made a decision that would damn both himself and his sons. Deep within the most forbidden sections of Prospero's libraries, the Primarch had discovered references to entities that claimed mastery over the forces of change and mutation. These beings, dwelling within the deepest reaches of the warp, possessed the power to halt unwanted transformations and redirect the forces of change according to their will. The texts warned of the dangers inherent in dealing with such entities, but Magnus's desperation overrode his caution. The ritual Magnus performed to contact Tzeentch took place in the deepest vaults beneath Prospero's greatest pyramid, surrounded by wards and protections that had been crafted by generations of the planet's most skilled sorcerers. The Primarch believed these safeguards would protect him from the worst consequences of his actions, allowing him to negotiate from a position of relative strength. This confidence proved to be a fatal miscalculation, as Tzeentch had been manipulating events toward this exact moment for decades, carefully arranging circumstances to ensure that Magnus would have no choice but to seek the Chaos God's aid. The bargain struck between Magnus and Tzeentch appeared straightforward on the surface. The Architect of Fate would halt the flesh change, afflicting the Thousand Suns in exchange for the Primarch's service at some future time. The terms seemed reasonable to Magnus, who believed his superior intellect and psychic abilities would allow him to fulfill whatever obligations the agreement entailed while maintaining his loyalty to the Emperor and the Imperial cause. The Primarch failed to recognize that Tzeentch's true goal was not immediate service, but the gradual corruption of Magnus and his Legion through a series of seemingly minor compromises. The immediate effects of the pact seemed to vindicate Magnus's decision. The rampant mutations afflicting his Legion stabilized, allowing the affected warriors to regain control over their transformed bodies and minds. The Thousand Suns, who had been on the verge of complete dissolution as rational beings, found themselves able to function effectively once again, their altered forms no longer continuing to change in unpredictable ways. The Legion's combat effectiveness returned to previous levels, and campaigns that had been suspended due to the mutation crisis resumed with renewed vigor. However, the true price of Magnus's bargain became apparent only gradually, as Tzeentch's influence began to manifest in subtle ways throughout the Legion's ranks. The stabilized mutations carried within them seeds of future change that would activate under specific circumstances. The psychic abilities of the Thousand Suns, enhanced by their transformations, created stronger connections to the warp that made them more susceptible to demonic influence. Most critically, the pact had established a link between Magnus and Tzeentch that the Chaos God could exploit to gradually corrupt the Primarch's judgment and decision-making processes. The Council of Nicaea represented the culmination of growing imperial concerns about the use of psychic powers within the Space Marine legions. The Emperor had observed the increasing reliance on psychers across his military forces, and the corresponding rise in warp-related incidents that threatened operational security and personnel safety. The Council brought together representatives from across the Imperium to debate the proper role of psychic abilities in imperial society and military doctrine, with particular focus on the practices of the Space Marine Librarius programs. Magnus arrived at Nicaea confident in his ability to defend the use of psychic powers and the practices of his Legion. The Primarch had prepared extensive arguments based on decades of successful campaigns where psychic abilities had provided crucial advantages over enemy forces. He brought with him detailed documentation of the Thousand Suns' achievements, statistical analyses showing the effectiveness of psychic tactics, and theoretical frameworks that demonstrated how properly trained psychers could serve the Imperial cause while minimizing risks to themselves and their allies. The Primarch's presentation to the Council showcased both his intellectual brilliance and his fundamental misunderstanding of the political dynamics at play. Magnus approached the debate as a scholarly discussion where the strength of his arguments and the weight of evidence would determine the outcome. He failed to recognize that many of the council's participants had already reached conclusions based on factors that had little to do with the tactical effectiveness of psychic abilities. Fear, superstition, and political considerations played larger roles in shaping opinions than the rational analysis that Magnus assumed would guide the proceedings. The opposition to psychic practices came from multiple sources within the imperial hierarchy. Primarchs like Mortarion and Corax had witnessed firsthand the dangers posed by uncontrolled psychers and the corruption that seemed to follow in the wake of extensive warp manipulation. Representatives from worlds that had suffered under psychic tyrants or demonic incursions spoke passionately about the need to restrict abilities that could so easily be turned against imperial citizens. Even some members of the nascent Inquisition argued that the risks of psychic practice outweighed any potential benefits. Magnus's defense of psychic practices inadvertently reinforced many of the concerns raised by his opponents. His detailed knowledge of warp phenomena and his casual references to entities and forces that existed beyond normal reality created unease among council members who viewed such familiarity with suspicion. The Primarch's confidence in his ability to safely navigate the dangers of the warp struck many observers as hubris rather than expertise, particularly given the recent mutation crisis that had affected his own legion. The Emperor's final ruling banned the use of psychic powers within the Space Marine legions, ordering the dissolution of all librarius programs and the cessation of psychic training and practice. The decree specifically prohibited the study of warp-related phenomena and the use of sorceress techniques, with violations to be treated as serious breaches of imperial discipline. For the Thousand Sons, this ruling represented not just a tactical limitation, but an existential threat to their identity and effectiveness as a fighting force. Magnus's reaction to the Nicaea decree revealed the extent to which Tzeentch's influence had already begun to affect his judgment. Rather than accepting the Emperor's decision and working within the new constraints, the Primarch chose to interpret the ruling in ways that allowed him to continue his research and psychic practices in secret. He convinced himself that his superior understanding of the warp and his noble intentions exempted him from the spirit, if not the letter, of the Emperor's commands. This rationalization marked the beginning of Magnus's active defiance of imperial authority and his deeper descent into Tzeentch's web of corruption. The Thousand Sons' continued use of psychic abilities after Nicaea took on an increasingly secretive character that isolated the Legion from their imperial allies. Magnus implemented elaborate protocols to conceal their psychic practices from outside observers, creating layers of deception that became more complex over time. The Legion's operations began to take on characteristics of conspiracy rather than military campaign, with battle brothers sworn to secrecy about techniques and knowledge that had once been shared openly with other imperial forces. This secrecy created a culture within the Legion that valued hidden knowledge and forbidden practices above transparency and cooperation. Thousand Sons warriors began to see themselves as guardians of truths too dangerous for lesser minds to comprehend, developing an attitude of intellectual superiority that further separated them from their peers. The Legion's increasing isolation made them more dependent on Magnus's guidance and less likely to question decisions that might have raised concerns among more diverse advisory groups. The discovery of Horus's treachery presented Magnus with what he believed was an opportunity to redeem himself in the Emperor's eyes by providing crucial intelligence about the War Master's betrayal. The Primarch's psychic abilities had allowed him to perceive the corruption spreading through the Luna Wolves and the broader conspiracy taking shape among the traitor legions. Magnus believed that warning the Emperor about this threat would demonstrate the value of psychic abilities and vindicate his defiance of the Nicaea decree. The method Magnus chose for delivering this warning revealed how completely Tzeentch's influence had compromised his judgment. Rather than using conventional communication methods or traveling to Terra personally, the Primarch decided to project his consciousness directly through the warp to reach the Emperor's throne room. This technique required enormous psychic energy and involved risks that Magnus either failed to recognize or chose to ignore in his eagerness to prove his loyalty and usefulness. The psychic assault Magnus launched to breach the Imperial Palace's defenses caused catastrophic damage to the Emperor's most crucial project, the construction of the human webway gate that would have freed humanity from dependence on warp travel. The Primarch's psychic projection tore through the carefully constructed barriers that protected the webway tunnel, allowing demons to pour through the breach into the heart of the Imperial Palace. The Emperor was forced to abandon other responsibilities to contain this incursion, effectively ending the webway project and trapping him on the Golden Throne. Magnus's warning about Horus's treachery, delivered at such enormous cost, was dismissed by the Emperor as either deliberate deception or evidence of the Primarch's complete corruption by Chaos forces. The destruction of the Webway project represented such a catastrophic setback to Imperial plans that the Emperor could not view Magnus's actions as anything other than betrayal, regardless of the Primarch's stated intentions. The irony that Magnus's attempt to prove his loyalty had instead confirmed his damnation was lost on the Primarch, who interpreted the Emperor's rejection as further evidence of Imperial prejudice against psychic abilities. The dispatch of Leman Russ and the Space Wolves to bring Magnus to account for his actions represented the Emperor's final attempt to salvage something from the catastrophe. The original orders called for Magnus to be brought to Terra, alive to face judgment for his crimes, with the possibility that some form of redemption might still be possible. However, Tzeentch's agents had been working to ensure that this outcome would not occur, manipulating communications and circumstances to guarantee that the confrontation would result in violence rather than surrender. The corruption of the orders sent to Leman Russ transformed a mission of capture into one of extermination, ensuring that the Space Wolves would approach Prospero with the intention of destroying the Thousand Suns rather than arresting their Primarch. This manipulation played perfectly into Tzeentch's long-term strategy, as it eliminated any possibility of Magnus's reconciliation with the Emperor, while creating the exact conditions needed to drive the Thousand Suns completely into the embrace of chaos. The burning of Prospero left the Thousand Suns scattered across the galaxy, their homeworld reduced to ash and their legion broken beyond recognition. In the aftermath of Leman Russ's assault, Magnus the Red had led the survivors through a desperate ritual that transported them bodily into the warp, seeking refuge within Tzeentch's crystal labyrinth. The transition from real space to the demon realm proved catastrophic for many battle brothers, their physical forms unable to withstand the raw psychic energies that permeated their new environment. Those who survived the translation found themselves trapped on the planet of the sorcerers, a world that existed simultaneously within the warp and as a reflection of their destroyed homeworld. The planet of the sorcerers bore disturbing similarities to Prospero, its great pyramids and libraries reconstructed from the memories and desires of the displaced Thousand Suns. Yet this new world carried fundamental differences that became apparent to those who examined it closely. The architecture shifted subtly when not directly observed, corridors rearranging themselves according to patterns that served purposes beyond mere navigation. The libraries contained texts that had never existed on Prospero alongside works that would not be written for millennia, their contents changing to reflect the current needs and obsessions of their readers. Most unsettling of all, the world's very substance seemed to respond to the emotional states of its inhabitants, becoming more solid when they felt confident and dissolving into warp stuff when doubt or despair took hold. Within this realm of crystallized possibility, the surviving Thousand Suns struggled to maintain their identity as space marines while adapting to an environment that challenged every assumption about the nature of reality. The Legion's command structure had been shattered during the evacuation from Prospero, with many senior officers either killed during the Space Wolves' assault or lost during the transition to the warp. Those who remained found themselves leading scattered groups of battle brothers, whose loyalty was strained by the traumatic events they had endured and the alien nature of their new home. Among the survivors, Chief Librarian Ozek Ariman emerged as one of the most influential figures in the Legion's attempts to rebuild and adapt. His mastery of psychic disciplines had allowed him to guide several companies through the transition to the planet of the sorcerers, and his scholarly background made him uniquely qualified to understand the challenges they now faced. Ahriman had served as Magnus's most trusted lieutenant for decades, his combination of tactical acumen and sorceress knowledge making him an ideal intermediary between the Primarch's grand visions and the practical needs of the Legion's rank and file. The chief librarian possessed a lean, ascetic appearance that reflected his dedication to scholarly pursuits over martial glory. His power armor bore the elaborate hieroglyphs and protective inscriptions characteristic of the Thousand Suns, but these decorations served functional purposes rather than mere ornamentation. Each symbol had been carefully researched and inscribed to provide specific protections against psychic attack or to enhance particular aspects of his sorceress abilities. His forestaff, a masterwork of prosperine craftsmanship, contained focusing crystals that allowed him to channel and direct psychic energies with unprecedented precision. Ahriman's intellectual capabilities rivaled those of his Primarch in many areas, particularly in the systematic study of warp phenomena and the development of practical applications for theoretical knowledge. Where Magnus often pursued understanding for its own sake, driven by an insatiable curiosity about the fundamental nature of reality, Ahriman approached sorcery as a tool to be mastered and employed for specific purposes. This pragmatic attitude made him an effective military commander and earned him the respect of battle brothers who might have found Magnus's more abstract interests difficult to relate to. The transition to the planet of the sorcerers had accelerated the mutations that plagued the Thousand Suns, the constant exposure to warp energies causing the flesh change to manifest with renewed virulence. Warriors who had maintained stable forms for decades after Magnus's pact with Tzeentch found themselves succumbing to uncontrolled transformation, their Astartes' physiology warping into configurations that bore little resemblance to their original appearance. The mutations followed no predictable pattern, affecting different individuals in ways that seemed almost deliberately designed to maximize psychological impact on their battle brothers. Some warriors developed additional limbs that emerged from unexpected locations on their bodies, arms sprouting from their backs or legs extending from their torsos in configurations that defied anatomical logic. Others found their sensory organs multiplying and relocating, eyes appearing on their palms or the backs of their hands, while their original eyes might merge into single organs or split into clusters of smaller visual receptors. The most disturbing transformations affected the warriors' heads and faces, with some developing multiple mouths that spoke in different voices, while others found their skulls elongating or their features rearranging themselves according to alien geometries. The psychological effects of these mutations proved as challenging as their physical manifestations. Battle brothers who had prided themselves on their discipline and self-control found their thought patterns altered by neural changes they could neither predict nor prevent. Some developed multiple streams of consciousness that operated independently, creating internal dialogues between different aspects of their personalities. Others experienced shifts in their emotional responses, finding themselves capable of feeling colors or tasting mathematical concepts while losing the ability to experience more conventional sensations. Ahriman watched these transformations with growing alarm, recognizing that the flesh change threatened to destroy what remained of the Thousand Suns as a coherent fighting force. The chief librarian had witnessed similar patterns during the original mutation crisis that had driven Magnus to make his bargain with Tzeentch, but the current outbreak seemed more virulent and less responsive to the techniques that had previously provided some measure of control. The constant exposure to warp energies on the planet of the sorcerers appeared to be accelerating the mutation process while making it more difficult to predict or contain. The affected warriors struggled to maintain their duties and responsibilities as the changes progressed. Battle brothers whose hands had transformed into tentacles or claws found themselves unable to operate their weapons effectively, while those whose vision had been altered by ocular mutations could no longer accurately target enemies or navigate familiar terrain. The mutations seemed to follow patterns that specifically undermined military effectiveness, as if guided by an intelligence that understood exactly how to weaken the Legion's combat capabilities. More troubling still was the impact of the mutations on the warriors' ability to think and reason clearly. The Thousand Sons had always prided themselves on their intellectual capabilities, viewing their scholarly pursuits and tactical analysis as fundamental aspects of their identity. As the flesh change progressed, many battle brothers found their cognitive abilities compromised by neural alterations that affected memory, logic, and decision-making processes. Warriors who had once been capable of complex strategic thinking became fixated on simple, repetitive tasks, while others developed obsessions with abstract concepts that rendered them incapable of practical action. Ahriman recognized that conventional approaches to managing the mutation crisis would prove inadequate to address the current situation. The techniques that had worked on Prospero relied on stable environmental conditions and access to resources that were no longer available. The planet of the sorcerers operated according to different physical laws that made traditional medical intervention impossible, while the constant flux of warp energies created variables that could not be controlled through normal means. The chief librarian realized that only a radical solution could preserve what remained of his legion. His research into potential remedies led him deep into the most forbidden sections of the reconstructed libraries, examining texts that dealt with the fundamental nature of existence and transformation. These works, many of which had been considered too dangerous for study even on Prospero, described techniques for manipulating the basic forces that governed life and death, matter and energy, stability and change. The knowledge contained within these tomes carried enormous risks, as the authors themselves had often succumbed to the very forces they sought to understand and control. The solution that gradually emerged from Ahriman's studies involved a ritual of unprecedented scope and complexity, one that would require the combined psychic power of the Legion's surviving sorcerers to implement successfully. The theoretical framework drew upon principles of sympathetic magic, quantum mechanics, and warp manipulation that had never been combined in a single working. The ritual would attempt to impose a state of perfect stasis upon the affected warriors, freezing their mutations at a stable point while preserving their consciousness and military capabilities. The technical challenges involved in designing such a ritual proved enormous. Ahriman needed to account for the individual variations in each warrior's mutation pattern while creating a working that could affect hundreds of subjects simultaneously. The ritual required precise calculations of psychic resonance frequencies, careful preparation of focusing materials, and the coordination of multiple sorcerers whose own abilities might be affected by the very forces they were attempting to manipulate. Each variable introduced additional complexity that had to be balanced against the others to prevent catastrophic failure. The chief librarian spent months developing the ritual structure, consulting with the Legion's surviving scholars, and testing individual components under controlled conditions. The preliminary experiments yielded promising but incomplete results, suggesting that the theoretical approach was sound, but that the practical implementation would require refinements that could only be developed through trial and error. The pressure to complete the work intensified as more battle brothers succumbed to advanced stages of mutation, their conditions deteriorating beyond the point where any intervention might prove effective. The final version of the ritual, which Ahriman designated the Rubric of Ahriman in accordance with Prosperine naming conventions, required the participation of every surviving sorcerer in the Legion. The working would draw upon the combined psychic potential of these individuals to create a field effect that could penetrate the warp energies surrounding the planet of the sorcerers and impose order upon the chaotic forces driving the mutation process. The ritual's success depended not only on the technical precision of its execution, but on the absolute coordination of all participants, as any deviation from the prescribed patterns could cause the entire working to collapse with potentially devastating consequences. The preparation for the ritual required extensive modifications to the planet of the sorcerers itself, as Ahriman needed to create a stable platform from which to launch such an ambitious psychic working. The sorcerers spent weeks inscribing protective circles and focusing arrays across the world's surface, using techniques that combine traditional prosperine ward crafting with innovations developed specifically for the warp environment. The inscriptions had to be carved into the planet's substance using tools that could affect crystallized possibility, a process that required constant vigilance to prevent the markings from shifting or disappearing as the world's reality fluctuated. The ritual circle itself covered several square kilometers, its intricate patterns incorporating mathematical formulae that described the fundamental relationships between matter, energy, and consciousness. The design drew upon sources ranging from ancient Terran mysticism to cutting-edge theoretical physics, creating a synthesis of knowledge that represented the pinnacle of human understanding in multiple disciplines. Each element of the pattern served multiple functions simultaneously, providing psychic focusing, protective barriers, and resonance amplification in configurations that had never been attempted before. The gathering of the Legion's sorcerers for the ritual represented both the culmination of Ahriman's preparation and the beginning of the most dangerous phase of the entire undertaking. Nearly 200 psychers assembled within the Great Circle, their combined presence creating psychic resonances that threatened to tear holes in local reality even before the ritual began. The chief librarian had arranged the participants according to their individual capabilities and specializations, creating a hierarchy of power that would allow him to direct and focus their combined energies with maximum efficiency. The ritual commenced at the moment when the planet of the sorcerers achieved optimal alignment with certain key points in the crystal labyrinth, a configuration that occurred only rarely and provided the stable foundation necessary for such an ambitious working. Ahriman began the invocation with formulae that had been developed through months of careful research, words of power that resonated with the fundamental forces governing transformation and stasis. The other sorcerers joined their voices to his, their combined chanting creating harmonics that affected reality on multiple levels simultaneously. The initial phases of the ritual proceeded according to Ahriman's calculations, the combined psychic energy of the participants creating visible effects that manifested as coruscating patterns of light and shadow across the planet of the sorcerers. The warp energies that constantly buffeted the world began to stabilize, forming ordered structures that reflected the mathematical relationships embedded in the ritual circle. The affected thousand suns, gathered in designated areas around the primary working site, showed signs of responding to the ritual's influence as their mutations began to slow and stabilize. However, as the ritual progressed beyond its initial stages, variables that Ahriman had not anticipated began to manifest. The interaction between the sorcerers combined psychic output and the ambient warp energies created feedback loops that amplified certain aspects of the working while dampening others. The chief librarian found himself struggling to maintain control over forces that seemed to be developing their own momentum, guided by influences that operated according to logic he had not accounted for in his calculations. The presence of Tzeentches became apparent as the ritual reached its climactic phase. The Architect of Fate had been observing Ahriman's preparations with interest, recognizing an opportunity to achieve multiple objectives through careful manipulation of the working's outcome. Rather than preventing the ritual or causing it to fail catastrophically, Tzeentch chose to redirect its effects in ways that would serve his own purposes while appearing to grant Ahriman's desired results. The climax of the rubric occurred when the accumulated psychic energy reached critical mass and began to discharge across the planet of the sorcerers in waves that affected every living being within range. The energy manifested as a brilliant azure flame that burned without producing heat, its touch transforming everything it encountered according to principles that transcended normal causality. The flame spread outward from the ritual circle with mathematical precision, its progress following patterns that reflected the geometric relationships embedded in Ahriman's calculations. As the azure fire reached the gathered thousand suns, it began the process of transformation that Ahriman had intended to prevent. However, the nature of the change differed dramatically from what the chief librarian had envisioned. Instead of stabilizing the warriors' mutations while preserving their consciousness and capabilities, the ritual's energy burned away their flesh entirely, reducing their bodies to fine dust while leaving their power armor intact and functional. The psychic essence of each warrior became bound to their armor, creating entities that retained their memories and personalities while existing as incorporeal spirits housed within ceramite shells. The transformation affected the vast majority of the Legion's battle brothers, sparing only those individuals who possessed significant psychic abilities of their own. The sorcerers who had participated in the ritual survived with their physical forms intact, though many bore new mutations that reflected their exposure to the working's energies. The non-psychic warriors, who had comprised the bulk of the Legion's fighting strength, found themselves reduced to animated suits of armor filled with the dust that had once been their flesh and bones. These newly created rubric marines retained their combat skills and tactical knowledge, their spirits capable of operating their weapons and equipment with the same proficiency they had possessed in life. However, they had lost the capacity for independent thought and decision-making, becoming automata that could only respond to direct commands from their surviving sorcerer officers. The transformation had preserved their military capabilities while stripping away their personalities and individual initiative, creating perfect soldiers who could follow orders without question, but could not adapt to unexpected situations or make complex decisions on their own. The immediate aftermath of the ritual left Ahriman in a state of shock and disbelief as he surveyed the results of his working. The chief librarian had intended to save his battle brothers from the ravages of mutation, but instead had condemned them to an existence as living ghosts trapped within their own armor. The irony that his attempt to preserve the Legion had instead destroyed it in a different but equally complete manner was not lost on him, though the full implications of what he had accomplished would only become clear over time. Magnus, the Red's reaction to the rubric's effects, demonstrated the depths of rage and disappointment that even a demon Primarch could experience. The Crimson King had been absent from the planet of the sorcerers during the ritual's performance, engaged in pursuing his own schemes within the Crystal Labyrinth. His return to find his legion transformed into dust-filled automata triggered an explosion of psychic fury that shattered several of the world's reconstructed pyramids and sent shockwaves through the surrounding warp space. The Primarch's anger focused primarily on Ahriman, whom he held responsible for the catastrophic outcome, despite the chief librarian's noble intentions. Magnus had spent centuries building the Thousand Suns into the most psychically capable legion in the galaxy, nurturing their development and protecting them from the worst effects of their mutations through his bargain with Tzeentch. To see that work undone by one of his most trusted subordinates represented a betrayal that cut deeper than any wound inflicted by external enemies. The confrontation between Magnus and Ahriman revealed the extent to which both had been changed by their experiences since the burning of Prospero. The Primarch's transformation into a demon prince had enhanced his psychic abilities, while altering his perspective on morality and consequence in ways that made him increasingly alien to his former subordinates. Ahriman, meanwhile, had been driven by desperation and scholarly pride to attempt a working that exceeded his capabilities, his judgment clouded by the very mutations he had sought to cure. Magnus's sentence of exile represented both punishment and recognition of Ahriman's continued value as a sorcerer and military commander. Rather than simply destroying his former chief librarian, the Primarch chose to banish him from the planet of the sorcerers, while allowing him to retain command of a portion of the Legion's forces. This decision reflected Magnus's understanding that Ahriman's skills would be needed for future operations, even as his presence served as a constant reminder of the ritual's tragic consequences. The exile of Ahriman marked the beginning of the Thousand Suns' fragmentation into multiple warbands and cults, each pursuing its own interpretation of the Legion's goals and methods. The surviving sorcerers found themselves divided between those who remained loyal to Magnus and those who chose to follow Ahriman into exile, while others struck out on their own to pursue individual agendas. This dispersal served Tzeentch's purposes by ensuring that the Legion's knowledge and capabilities would be spread across the galaxy, creating multiple opportunities for the Chaos God to influence events through different agents. The rubric marines themselves became valuable assets for all factions within the Fractured Legion, their unquestioning obedience and retained combat skills making them ideal troops for dangerous missions. The dust-filled warriors could operate in environments that would be lethal to living beings, their incorporeal nature allowing them to survive exposure to vacuum, radiation, and toxic atmospheres. However, their inability to think independently meant that they required constant supervision from sorcerer officers, limiting the tactical flexibility of forces that relied heavily on their capabilities. Ahriman's own response to his exile demonstrated the complex mixture of guilt, determination, and obsession that would drive his actions for millennia to come. The chief librarian accepted responsibility for the rubric's unexpected effects while refusing to abandon his belief that the ritual could be perfected and its consequences reversed. This conviction led him to begin a new quest for knowledge that would take him across the galaxy in search of texts, artifacts, and techniques that might provide the key to undoing his greatest failure. The focus of this new quest centered on the Black Library of the Eldar, a repository of forbidden knowledge that existed within the webway and contained information about the fundamental nature of chaos and the warp. Ahriman had learned of the Black Library's existence through references in captured Eldar texts and communications intercepted during the Great Crusade, but accessing it would require overcoming defenses that had been designed to keep out exactly the sort of entities he had become. The pursuit of the Black Library became Ahriman's defining obsession, driving him to attempt increasingly desperate and dangerous schemes to gain entry to the Eldar repository. Each failure taught him more about the nature of the defenses he faced, while providing new insights into the forces that governed fate and possibility. The chief librarian's repeated attempts to breach the Black Library's protections became a recurring theme in Imperial and Eldar records, his campaigns leaving trails of destruction across multiple sectors as he gathered resources and followers for each new assault. The ongoing consequences of the rubric extended far beyond the immediate transformation of the Thousand Sons battle brothers. The ritual had created a template for similar workings that other chaos sorcerers began to study and adapt for their own purposes, spreading knowledge of techniques that could fundamentally alter the nature of existence itself. The success of the working, despite its unintended consequences, demonstrated that it was possible to impose order upon the chaotic forces of the warp through sufficient preparation and psychic power. The rubric marines themselves became objects of study for both Imperial and Chaos forces, their unique nature providing insights into the relationship between consciousness and physical form. Tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus found the dust-filled warriors particularly fascinating, as they represented a form of existence that blurred the boundaries between organic life and mechanical function. Some radical members of the Mechanicus began experimenting with similar techniques, seeking to achieve their own version of the flesh-weakness transcendence that the rubric had accidentally accomplished. The influence of Tzeentch extends far beyond the demon legions and fallen space marines that serve him openly within the warp. Throughout the Imperium of Man, countless mortal servants carry out the Architect of Fate's will through networks of cults and secret societies that operate in the shadows of Imperial civilization. These organizations form the hidden foundation of Tzeentch's power in real space, their members working to advance schemes that may span centuries while believing themselves to be pursuing legitimate goals of knowledge, advancement, or reform. The formation of Tzeentch cults follows patterns that reflect the Chaos God's preference for subtlety and long-term manipulation over direct confrontation. Unlike the blood-soaked rituals that mark the worship of Khorne or the plague-ridden gatherings of Nurgle's followers, Tzeentch cults often begin as seemingly innocent study groups, professional associations, or reform movements. A gathering of scholars researching ancient history might gradually shift their focus toward forbidden archaeological sites. A political discussion group could evolve into a conspiracy to influence planetary governance through carefully placed legislation. An artists' collective might begin incorporating increasingly abstract and impossible geometries into their work, unknowingly reproducing patterns that serve as focusing arrays for psychic manipulation. The recruitment process for these cults operates through careful identification and cultivation of individuals whose personal circumstances make them susceptible to Tzeentch's influence. The Architect of Fate's servants excel at recognizing the signs of ambition, intellectual curiosity, and dissatisfaction with current circumstances that mark potential converts. A junior tech priest frustrated by the hidebound traditions of their forge world becomes a candidate for introduction to more progressive interpretations of the Omnissiah's will. A planetary governor struggling with administrative challenges might be approached by advisors offering innovative solutions to complex problems. A scholar whose research has been stifled by imperial censorship could find themselves invited to join a private library where forbidden texts are studied in secret. The initial approach to potential recruits rarely involves any obvious connection to chaos worship or heretical activities. Instead, cult agents present themselves as fellow professionals, concerned citizens, or like-minded individuals who share the target's interests and frustrations. The conversation begins with legitimate topics: administrative reform, technological innovation, historical research, or artistic expression that gradually expand to include increasingly questionable concepts. The progression occurs so slowly that recruits often fail to recognize when they have crossed the line from acceptable inquiry into heretical investigation. Indoctrination within Tzeentch cults follows a carefully structured progression that mirrors the academic advancement systems found in imperial universities and research institutions. New members begin with access to relatively harmless information that nonetheless contains seeds of more dangerous knowledge. A cult focused on historical research might start by sharing genuinely valuable archaeological discoveries before gradually introducing texts that describe pre-imperial civilizations in ways that contradict official imperial doctrine. Political reform groups begin with reasonable proposals for improving governmental efficiency before moving toward more radical restructuring that would fundamentally alter the balance of power within imperial society. The hierarchical structure of most Tzeentch cults reflects the Chaos God's appreciation for complex organizational schemes and his understanding that knowledge serves as the most effective form of currency among his mortal servants. Lower-ranking members receive access to information and resources that enhance their professional capabilities and personal advancement, creating tangible benefits that justify their continued participation. Mid-level cultists gain insight into the connections between seemingly unrelated events, allowing them to anticipate and profit from political and economic changes before they become apparent to outside observers. Senior members receive knowledge that borders on the prophetic, their understanding of probability and causation enabling them to manipulate events with precision that appears almost supernatural to those who lack similar insight. The cult's inner circle typically consists of individuals who have undergone sufficient corruption to serve as direct conduits for Tzeentch's will, while retaining enough of their original personality and capabilities to function effectively within imperial society. These senior cultists often hold positions of significant authority within their chosen fields, their influence extending far beyond the cult's immediate membership. A senior tech priest might control the research priorities of an entire forge world, subtly directing technological development toward goals that serve Tzeentch's purposes. A high-ranking administrative official could influence policy decisions that affect entire sectors, their recommendations carrying weight that allows them to implement changes that would be impossible for lower-ranking individuals to achieve. The methods employed by Tzeentch cults to maintain secrecy and avoid detection by imperial authorities demonstrate the sophisticated understanding of human psychology and institutional behavior that characterizes the Architect of Fate's approach to corruption. Rather than operating as obviously heretical organizations, these groups maintain facades of legitimacy that allow them to function openly within imperial society. Professional associations provide cover for regular meetings and communication between members, while research projects offer justification for accessing restricted materials and conducting activities that might otherwise attract suspicion. The compartmentalization of knowledge within cult structures serves multiple purposes beyond simple security. By limiting each member's access to information about the organization's true scope and purpose, cult leaders can prevent the kind of comprehensive understanding that might lead to crisis of conscience or attempts to expose the group to imperial authorities. Lower-ranking members genuinely believe they are participating in legitimate activities, their ignorance of the cult's true nature serving as both protection and justification for their continued involvement. This structure also allows cults to survive the loss of individual members or even entire cells, as no single person possesses enough information to compromise the entire organization. Communication between cult cells and with higher authorities within Tzeentch's hierarchy relies on methods that exploit the Imperium's own communication systems while avoiding detection by monitoring agencies. Coded messages embedded within routine administrative reports can convey complex instructions across vast distances, their true meaning apparent only to recipients who possess the proper interpretive keys. Academic papers published in scholarly journals serve as vehicles for distributing information that appears to deal with theoretical concepts, but actually provides practical guidance for cult activities. Artistic works, architectural designs, and even musical compositions can carry encoded information that allows coordination of activities across multiple worlds and sectors. The role of mutation within Tzeentch cults presents both opportunities and challenges for the architect of fate's mortal servants. Unlike the demon legions that embrace physical transformation as a mark of their patron's favor, mortal cultists must balance the benefits of mutation against the need to maintain their positions within imperial society. The gifts of Tzeentch often manifest as enhanced cognitive abilities, improved pattern recognition, or expanded sensory perception that can significantly improve an individual's professional effectiveness. A scholar might develop the ability to perceive connections between disparate pieces of information with unprecedented clarity, while a politician could gain intuitive understanding of the motivations and likely actions of their colleagues and opponents. However, these beneficial mutations are often accompanied by more obvious physical changes that require careful concealment to avoid detection. Additional eyes might appear in locations that can be hidden by clothing or hair, while alterations to bone structure or skin texture must be disguised through cosmetics or prosthetics. Some cultists develop the ability to consciously control their mutations, shifting between normal and altered states as circumstances require. This capability allows them to access enhanced abilities when needed while maintaining their human appearance during routine interactions with imperial citizens. The psychological effects of mutation often prove more challenging to manage than the physical changes. Enhanced cognitive abilities can lead to frustration with the limitations of unmodified humans, creating a sense of superiority that threatens to expose the cultist's true nature through inappropriate behavior or comments. Expanded sensory perception might reveal disturbing truths about the nature of reality that require significant mental discipline to process without losing sanity. The constant awareness of their own transformation can create anxiety about discovery that affects decision-making and social interactions in ways that draw unwanted attention. Advanced cultists learn to embrace their mutations as signs of their patron's favor, while developing the skills necessary to function effectively within imperial society despite their altered nature. The most successful adapt their professional roles to take advantage of their enhanced capabilities, becoming indispensable to their organizations through their apparently supernatural insight and effectiveness. A mutated tech priest might gain reputation as a brilliant innovator whose technological breakthroughs consistently exceed expectations, while a transformed administrative official could become known for their uncanny ability to predict and prevent bureaucratic problems before they develop into crises. The infiltration of imperial institutions represents one of the most significant threats posed by Tzeentch cults, as their members work to subvert the very organizations responsible for maintaining order and orthodoxy throughout the Imperium. The Adeptus Administratum, with its vast bureaucracy and complex hierarchies, provides numerous opportunities for cultists to gain positions that allow them to influence policy and resource allocation on a massive scale. A single corrupted official in the right position can redirect supplies intended for loyalist forces, delay reinforcements to threatened worlds, or approve research projects that serve Tzeentch's purposes while appearing to advance legitimate imperial interests. The Adeptus Mechanicus presents particularly attractive targets for Tzeentch cults due to the organization's focus on technological advancement and the acquisition of knowledge. Tech priests who have become frustrated with the hidebound traditions of their forge worlds can be gradually introduced to more progressive interpretations of the Omnissiah's will that emphasize innovation and experimentation over adherence to established patterns. These corrupted tech priests often achieve remarkable breakthroughs that advance their careers and increase their influence within the Mechanicus hierarchy, their success serving as justification for their increasingly unorthodox methods. The infiltration of forge worlds by Tzeentch cults can have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate corruption of individual tech priests. Compromised research facilities might develop technologies that appear beneficial but contain hidden flaws or backdoors that can be exploited at crucial moments. Manufacturing centers under cult influence could produce equipment that functions normally under most circumstances, but fails catastrophically when specific conditions are met. The distribution of corrupted technologies throughout the Imperium creates a network of potential vulnerabilities that can be activated to support larger schemes when the timing is appropriate. Educational institutions throughout the Imperium provide another avenue for Tzeentch cults to spread their influence and recruit new members. Universities, seminaries, and training academies bring together individuals whose intellectual curiosity and ambition make them susceptible to the architect of fate's corruption. Corrupted faculty members can gradually introduce forbidden concepts into their curricula, presenting dangerous ideas as theoretical exercises or historical curiosities that students are encouraged to examine critically. The academic environment provides natural cover for the kind of questioning and investigation that might be viewed with suspicion in other contexts. The corruption of imperial scholars and researchers creates a multiplier effect that extends the reach of Tzeentch cults far beyond their immediate membership. Corrupted academics produce research that appears legitimate but contains subtle biases or omissions that serve the Chaos God's purposes. Their students trained in these compromised methodologies carry the corruption forward into their own careers and research projects. Over time, entire fields of study can become influenced by Tzeentchian concepts without the majority of practitioners recognizing the source of their theoretical frameworks. The relationship between Tzeentch cults and planetary governors represents one of the most dangerous forms of high-level corruption within the imperial hierarchy. Governors who have been influenced by cult agents can implement policies that appear to serve legitimate administrative purposes while actually advancing schemes that span multiple worlds and sectors. The authority wielded by planetary governors allows them to make decisions that affect millions of lives, their corruption potentially compromising entire systems through misdirected resources, inappropriate military deployments, or the implementation of laws that create conditions favorable to chaos infiltration. The manipulation of planetary governors often begins with the provision of genuinely helpful advice and resources that allow them to address immediate problems and improve their administrative effectiveness. Cult agents present themselves as consultants, advisors, or representatives of successful governors from other worlds who are willing to share their expertise. The solutions they provide work exactly as promised, creating trust and dependence that makes the governors more receptive to increasingly questionable suggestions. Over time, the governors find themselves implementing policies that serve purposes they do not fully understand, their decisions guided by advisors whose true loyalties lie with the architect of fate. The activities of Tzeentch cults extend beyond simple infiltration and corruption to include active operations designed to spread forbidden knowledge and trigger psychic awakenings throughout the imperial population. These campaigns often take the form of cultural movements that promote artistic, philosophical, or scientific concepts that contain hidden psychic triggers. A new artistic style might incorporate geometric patterns that resonate with latent psychers, causing them to experience visions or develop abilities they cannot control. Philosophical movements could spread ideas that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality, creating mental conditions that make individuals more susceptible to warp influence. The distribution of forbidden knowledge through seemingly innocent channels allows Tzeentch cults to corrupt individuals who would never knowingly participate in heretical activities. Books that appear to deal with legitimate historical or scientific topics might contain passages that serve as psychic triggers for readers with the proper mental preparation. Educational materials distributed to schools and universities could include exercises that unknowingly train students in basic sorceress techniques. Even entertainment media can carry embedded messages that influence the thoughts and dreams of consumers, gradually preparing them for more direct forms of corruption. Psychic awakening rituals conducted by Tzeentch cults serve multiple purposes within the architect of fate's broader schemes. These ceremonies can trigger the manifestation of psychic abilities in individuals who might otherwise remain dormant throughout their lives, creating new resources for the cult to exploit. The rituals also serve as focusing events that allow cult members to demonstrate their devotion and advance within the organization's hierarchy. Most importantly, the psychic energies released during these ceremonies can be directed towards specific goals, whether enhancing the abilities of existing cultists or creating conditions that support larger operations. The locations chosen for psychic awakening rituals reflect the sophisticated understanding of warp dynamics that characterizes Tzeentch's approach to corruption. Sites with natural psychic resonance, such as areas where significant historical events occurred or locations with unusual geological formations, provide enhanced focusing effects that amplify the ritual's power. Urban environments offer the advantage of large populations from which to draw participants and witnesses, while remote locations provide security from imperial interference. The most ambitious rituals take place at sites where multiple factors combine to create optimal conditions, such as ancient ruins located at points of psychic significance within densely populated areas. The coordination between different Tzeentch cults and their relationship with other chaos factions demonstrates the complex web of alliances and rivalries that characterizes the Great Game. Cults dedicated to the architect of fate often find themselves working alongside or in competition with organizations serving other chaos gods, their interactions reflecting the broader conflicts between their patrons. A Tzeentch cult focused on technological innovation might cooperate with Slaanesh cultists who share their interest in pushing boundaries and exploring forbidden possibilities, while competing with Nurgle worshippers whose acceptance of decay and stagnation represents everything the architect of fate opposes. The manipulation of other chaos factions by Tzeentch cults reflects the architect of fate's preference for indirect action and complex schemes over direct confrontation. Rather than openly opposing cults dedicated to rival chaos gods, Tzeentchian agents often work to redirect their activities toward purposes that ultimately serve the architect of fate's goals. A Khorne cult's planned assault on an imperial facility might be delayed or redirected through carefully placed intelligence that suggests more valuable targets elsewhere. Slaanesh cultists pursuing increasingly exotic pleasures could find themselves guided toward experiences that require knowledge or resources controlled by Tzeentch's servants. The long-term consequences of Tzeentch cult activities extend far beyond their immediate objectives, creating ripple effects that influence events across multiple generations. A single corrupted decision by a planetary governor might set in motion a chain of events that leads to the fall of an entire sector decades later. The distribution of forbidden knowledge through educational systems can create populations that are more susceptible to chaos corruption, providing fertile ground for future cult recruitment. The technological innovations produced by compromised Forge worlds might contain flaws that only become apparent when activated by specific conditions, creating vulnerabilities that can be exploited centuries after their creation. The detection and elimination of Tzeentch cults presents unique challenges for imperial authorities due to the sophisticated methods these organizations employ to maintain their cover and the often beneficial nature of their apparent activities. Inquisitors tasked with investigating suspected cult activity must distinguish between legitimate innovation and heretical corruption, a process complicated by the fact that many cult members genuinely believe they are serving the imperial cause. The compartmentalized structure of these organizations means that eliminating known members may not significantly impact the cult's overall capabilities, while the destruction of one cell often triggers the activation of previously dormant backup networks. The psychological profiles of Tzeentch cultists differ significantly from those of other chaos worshippers, their motivations often appearing rational and even admirable to outside observers. Unlike the obvious madness that characterizes followers of Khorne or Nurgle, Tzeentch cultists typically maintain their sanity and professional competence throughout their corruption, making them much more difficult to identify through behavioral analysis. Their corruption manifests as gradual shifts in priorities and methods rather than dramatic personality changes, allowing them to maintain their positions and relationships within imperial society while working to advance their patrons' goals. The machinations of Tzeentch extend across the breadth of galactic history like an intricate web of cause and effect, each strand representing schemes that span millennia and influence events on scales that dwarf the comprehension of mortal minds. Unlike his brother Chaos gods who operate through direct intervention and overwhelming force, the Architect of Fate achieves his goals through manipulation so subtle that his victims often believe themselves to be acting according to their own free will and rational judgment. This approach requires patience measured in geological ages and an understanding of causality that encompasses not just immediate consequences, but the ripple effects that propagate through time and space to shape the destiny of entire civilizations. The Horus Heresy stands as perhaps the most significant example of Tzeentch's long-term strategic planning, a conflict that appeared to center on the rivalry between Horus and the Emperor, but actually served multiple layers of the Architect of Fate's grand design. The corruption of the War Master represented only the most visible aspect of a scheme that had been developing since the early days of the Great Crusade, its roots extending back to the very creation of the Primarchs and the Emperor's attempts to unite humanity under a single banner. Tzeentch had observed the Emperor's growing psychic power with interest, recognizing both the threat and opportunity represented by humanity's most potent psyker. The manipulation of key figures during the heresy demonstrated Tzeentch's preference for working through existing ambitions and rivalries rather than creating artificial conflicts. Erebus of the Word Bearers, whose corruption of Horus on Davin provided the catalyst for the War Master's fall, had been influenced by whispers and visions that appeared to come from his own intuition and scholarly research. The warrior lodge system that spread through the legions created networks of personal loyalty that bypassed official command structures, establishing communication channels that could be exploited when the time came for open rebellion. Each element appeared to develop naturally from the personalities and circumstances of the individuals involved, masking the external influence that guided their evolution. The timing of the heresy's outbreak reflected Tzeentch's understanding of the Emperor's vulnerabilities and the broader strategic situation facing the Imperium. The rebellion began just as the Great Crusade reached its zenith, when Imperial forces were stretched across thousands of worlds, and the Emperor had withdrawn from active military command to pursue his secret projects on Terra. The War Master's corruption occurred at the moment when his authority over the other Primarchs was at its peak, ensuring that his rebellion would carry maximum impact and create the greatest possible disruption to Imperial unity. The coordination required to achieve such precise timing across multiple theaters of operation demonstrated the sophisticated intelligence networks that Tzeentch had established throughout the galaxy. The influence of the Architect of Fate on individual Primarchs extended far beyond the obvious corruption of Magnus the Red and his thousand sons. Fulgrim's gradual descent into perfectionist obsession created opportunities for manipulation through his desire to achieve ever greater heights of achievement and beauty. The demon sword that ultimately claimed the Phoenix provided a focus for corruption that appeared to offer enhanced capabilities, while gradually subverting the Primarch's judgment and moral compass. Perdurabo's bitterness over his legion's thankless siege warfare assignments made him receptive to arguments about the Emperor's ingratitude and the futility of blind loyalty, his analytical mind calculating the costs and benefits of rebellion in ways that seemed purely rational. The manipulation of Lorgar and the Word-Bearers represented a particularly sophisticated example of Tzeentch's long-term planning, as the architect of fate recognized the potential value of a legion dedicated to spreading religious devotion throughout the galaxy. The Emperor's humiliation of Lorgar at Monarchia created the emotional conditions necessary for the Primarch's turn toward chaos worship, but the specific direction of that corruption required careful guidance to ensure it served Tzeentch's purposes. The pilgrimage to the Eye of Terror that followed provided opportunities for direct intervention, with visions and revelations that appeared to come from divine inspiration, but actually reflected careful manipulation of the Primarch's psychological vulnerabilities. The corruption of Horus himself required the most delicate touch, as the War Master's loyalty to the Emperor ran deeper than that of most other Primarchs, and his strategic acumen made him capable of recognizing obvious manipulation attempts. The weapon that wounded Horus on Davin had been crafted specifically to create the kind of spiritual injury that would require healing through methods that opened the Primarch to chaos influence. The visions experienced during his recovery presented him with carefully constructed scenarios that played upon his fears about the Emperor's intentions and his own role in the post-Crusade Imperium, each revelation building upon previous doubts to create a comprehensive case for rebellion that appeared to be based on objective analysis of available evidence. The strategic objectives served by the Horus heresy extended far beyond the simple goal of overthrowing the Emperor, encompassing multiple layers of purpose that reflected Tzeentch's understanding of the long-term development of galactic civilization. The Civil War served to shatter the unity of the Space Marine legions, creating the conditions that would eventually lead to their division into smaller chapters that could never again pose the same threat to Imperial stability. The destruction of much of the Imperium's institutional knowledge during the conflict ensured that humanity would enter a period of technological and cultural stagnation that would make it more susceptible to gradual corruption over the millennia that followed. The Emperor's entombment upon the Golden Throne represented perhaps the greatest achievement of Tzeentch's heresy-era schemes, as it removed humanity's most powerful protector from active leadership while creating the conditions for his gradual transformation into something that served the architect of fate's purposes. The psychic beacon that the Emperor became attracted the attention of every psyker and demon in the galaxy, creating a focal point for warp activity that made Terra itself a nexus of supernatural power. The daily sacrifice of psykers required to maintain the throne created a constant stream of souls that fed the warp while gradually corrupting the very institution designed to protect humanity from chaos influence. The manipulation of the Webway project demonstrated Tzeentch's ability to turn the Emperor's greatest achievements against him through careful timing and misdirection. The human Webway gate represented a potential threat to chaos influence over humanity, as it would have provided safe passage between worlds without requiring travel through the warp. The corruption of Magnus and his subsequent psychic assault on Terra created the breach that doomed the project, while appearing to result from the Primarch's loyalty rather than his treachery. The irony that Magnus's attempt to warn the Emperor about Horus's rebellion instead enabled that rebellion's success reflected the kind of complex causality that Tzeentch manipulated with masterful precision. The creation and corruption of psykers throughout the galaxy serves as another major focus of Tzeentch's long-term schemes, as these individuals represent both valuable resources and potential threats to the architect of fate's plans. The steady increase in psychic awakening among human populations creates opportunities for recruitment and manipulation, while simultaneously destabilizing imperial society through the fear and persecution that accompanies such manifestations. Each new psyker represents a potential conduit for warp influence, their abilities creating weak points in reality that can be exploited by demons and other supernatural entities. The relationship between Tzeentch and the Emperor's psychic might operate on multiple levels that reflect both competition and symbiosis between these two powerful entities. The Emperor's role as a psychic beacon attracts and focuses warp energy in ways that serve Tzeentch's purposes, even as it provides protection for humanity against other chaos influences. The constant stream of psychic energy flowing through the Golden Throne creates opportunities for subtle manipulation and corruption that would be impossible under normal circumstances. The Emperor's gradual transformation from protector to something approaching a chaos entity himself represents the ultimate expression of Tzeentch's preference for corruption over destruction. The manipulation of the Webway project extended beyond its initial sabotage to encompass ongoing efforts to exploit the breach for strategic advantage. The demon incursions that followed Magnus's psychic assault provided intelligence about Imperial defenses and capabilities that proved valuable for planning future operations. The resources diverted to contain these incursions weakened other Imperial projects and military campaigns, creating opportunities for Chaos forces to achieve victories that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. The ongoing threat posed by the breach forced the Emperor to remain on the Golden Throne, preventing him from taking direct action against other chaos schemes developing throughout the galaxy. The influence of Tzeentch on Xeno's races demonstrates the Architect of Fate's understanding that galactic dominance requires manipulation of all significant powers rather than focus on humanity alone. The Eldar, with their sophisticated understanding of fate and prophecy, present both valuable allies and dangerous opponents whose actions can significantly impact the development of Tzeentch's schemes. The corruption of Eldar Farseers represents a particularly valuable achievement, as these individuals possess the knowledge and abilities necessary to perceive and potentially counter the Architect of Fate's manipulations. The approach to corrupting Eldar Farseers requires techniques fundamentally different from those used on human psykers, as the Eldar possess natural defenses against chaos influence and cultural traditions that emphasize the dangers of warp manipulation. The corruption typically begins with the provision of apparently accurate prophecies that help the Farseer achieve legitimate goals and protect their craftworld or other Eldar communities. These successes create trust in the source of the visions, while gradually accustoming the Farseer to relying on external guidance rather than their own abilities and judgment. The long-term corruption of Eldar Farseers often involves the gradual introduction of concepts that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of fate and prophecy. Visions that suggest multiple contradictory futures can create doubt about the reliability of traditional divination techniques, making the Farseer more receptive to alternative methods of perceiving potential outcomes. The provision of knowledge about probability manipulation and causal engineering presents opportunities for more direct intervention in developing situations, gradually transforming the Farseer from a passive observer of fate into an active manipulator of events. The corruption of individual Farseers creates ripple effects throughout Eldar society that extend far beyond the immediate impact on the corrupted individual. Craftworlds that rely on compromised Farseers for guidance find themselves making strategic decisions based on tainted information, their actions serving Tzeentch's purposes while appearing to advance legitimate Eldar interests. The sophisticated nature of Eldar society means that corruption at high levels can influence thousands of individuals without any of them recognizing the source of their misfortune. The interest of Tzeentch in various alien psychic phenomena extends beyond the Eldar to encompass the abilities and knowledge of numerous other Xenos races encountered throughout the galaxy. The Orc Weirdboys, with their crude but powerful psychic abilities, represent opportunities for manipulation that can influence entire WoW campaigns and redirect their destructive potential toward targets that serve the architect of fate's strategic goals. The psychic gestalt consciousness that emerges from large orc populations creates a collective entity that can be influenced through carefully placed suggestions and manipulated coincidences. The Tau Empire, despite its leaders' claims of rationality and rejection of superstition, possesses individuals with latent psychic abilities that make them susceptible to Tzeentch's influence. The ethereal cast's ability to inspire loyalty and coordinate the actions of other Tau castes suggests psychic capabilities that they themselves may not fully understand. The corruption of key ethereals could redirect the entire Empire's expansion efforts, turning their advanced technology and military capabilities toward goals that appear to serve Tau interests while actually advancing chaos objectives. The Tyranid hive mind represents perhaps the most challenging target for Tzeentch's manipulation, as its alien psychology and collective consciousness operate according to principles that differ fundamentally from those governing individual entities. However, the architect of fate schemes involving the Tyranids focus not on direct corruption, but on influencing the circumstances and environments that the hive fleets encounter during their advance through the galaxy. The timing and location of Tyranid invasions can be influenced through manipulation of the psychic beacons and disturbances that guide their movement, redirecting their advance toward targets that serve multiple strategic purposes. The concept of the Great Game provides the overarching framework within which all of Tzeentch's schemes operate, representing the eternal competition between the Chaos Gods for dominance over the warp and influence in real space. Unlike the direct confrontations favored by Khorne or the gradual corruption preferred by Nurgle, Tzeentch's approach to the Great Game emphasizes misdirection and the achievement of multiple objectives through single actions. A scheme that appears to serve one purpose often conceals secondary and tertiary goals that become apparent only when viewed from a broader temporal perspective. The apparent defeats that Tzeentch occasionally suffers serve larger strategic purposes that reflect his understanding of the cyclical nature of conflict and change. The exile of Ahriman following the Rubric ritual appeared to represent a significant setback for the Thousand Sons and their patron, but the dispersion of the Legion's knowledge and capabilities across the galaxy created opportunities for influence that would have been impossible if they had remained unified under Magnus's direct control. The continued attempts to breach the Black Library serve not just as efforts to achieve specific objectives, but as ongoing tests of Eldar defenses and sources of intelligence about their capabilities and limitations. The manipulation of time itself represents one of Tzeentch's most sophisticated capabilities, allowing the architect of fate to coordinate events across multiple temporal frameworks and ensure that his schemes unfold with perfect timing, regardless of the apparent randomness of individual circumstances. The ability to perceive and influence probability cascades enables interventions that appear as remarkable coincidences, but actually represent carefully calculated adjustments to the flow of events. A single delayed message can prevent a crucial alliance from forming, while the timely arrival of reinforcements can turn a minor skirmish into a major victory that reshapes the strategic balance across an entire sector. The long-term nature of Tzeentch's schemes requires coordination mechanisms that can function across centuries or millennia without requiring constant direct supervision. The establishment of self-perpetuating cycles of corruption and manipulation ensures that schemes continue to develop even when the architect of fate's attention is focused elsewhere. Corrupted institutions develop their own momentum, their compromised decision-making processes naturally leading toward outcomes that serve Tzeentch's purposes. Educational systems that have been influenced by subtle curriculum changes continue to produce graduates whose thinking has been shaped by carefully introduced concepts, creating generations of individuals who are predisposed toward the kind of questioning and experimentation that opens doors to further corruption. The coordination between different aspects of Tzeentch's schemes often requires the sacrifice of immediate advantages in favor of long-term strategic positioning. A cult that could achieve significant short-term gains through aggressive expansion might instead be directed to maintain a low profile and focus on gradual infiltration of key institutions. Military forces that could win decisive victories through direct assault might be ordered to conduct harassment campaigns that appear less successful, but create the specific conditions needed for other operations to succeed. This willingness to accept apparent setbacks in service of larger goals distinguishes Tzeentch's approach from those of his brother Chaos Gods and makes his schemes particularly difficult for opponents to counter effectively. The influence of Tzeentch on the development of human civilization extends beyond specific events and conflicts to encompass the gradual shaping of cultural and intellectual trends that affect entire populations. The promotion of certain philosophical concepts, scientific theories, and artistic movements creates mental frameworks that make individuals more susceptible to further corruption, while appearing to represent natural intellectual development. The introduction of mathematical concepts that describe impossible geometries or physical theories that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality creates cognitive dissonance that can be exploited to introduce more overtly heretical ideas. The manipulation of technological development represents another major focus of Tzeentch's long-term schemes, as the architect of fate recognizes that control over innovation and scientific progress provides leverage over the entire trajectory of civilization. The corruption of research institutions and individual scientists creates opportunities to direct technological development toward goals that serve chaos purposes while appearing to advance legitimate human interests. Technologies that appear beneficial in the short term might contain hidden flaws or capabilities that only become apparent when activated under specific conditions, creating vulnerabilities that can be exploited decades or centuries after their initial deployment. The forces arrayed against Tzeentch's machinations span the breadth of the galaxy, from the elite demon hunters of the Grey Knights to the ancient Eldar guardians of forbidden knowledge. These opponents represent humanity's most dedicated defenders against the corrupting influence of the Architect of Fate, their specialized training, equipment, and knowledge making them uniquely capable of recognizing and countering the subtle schemes that characterize Tzeentchian corruption. Unlike the enemies faced by other Chaos Gods, those who oppose Tzeentch must possess not only martial prowess, but intellectual sophistication sufficient to unravel conspiracies that may span centuries and penetrate the highest levels of Imperial society. The Grey Knights chapter stands as the Imperium's premier force for combating demonic incursions, their entire existence dedicated to warfare against the entities that serve the ruinous powers. Founded in secrecy during the closing days of the Horus Heresy, the chapter operates from the fortress monastery of Titan, hidden within the warp-shrouded moon that orbits Saturn. The Grey Knights' creation represented the Emperor's recognition that conventional space marines, despite their enhanced physiology and training, lacked the specialized capabilities necessary to face the growing threat of chaos corruption that would plague the Imperium in the millennia following the heresy. The recruitment and training of Grey Knights differs fundamentally from that of other Space Marine chapters, as every battle brother must possess not only the physical capabilities required for Astartes transformation, but also the psychic potential necessary to wield the chapter's specialized weapons and techniques. The selection process identifies candidates whose minds demonstrate both the strength to resist chaos corruption and the flexibility to comprehend the alien logic that governs demonic entities. These individuals undergo conditioning that goes far beyond the standard hypno-indoctrination used by other chapters, their minds fortified through techniques that blend psychic training with deep philosophical instruction designed to create unshakable certainty in their purpose and methods. The chapter's approach to combating Tzeentchian demons reflects their understanding that the Architect of Fate's servants operate through deception and manipulation rather than brute force. Grey Knight squads tasked with hunting Lords of Change and their minions receive specialized training in recognizing illusions, detecting probability manipulation, and maintaining tactical cohesion in the face of psychic attacks designed to sow confusion and discord. Their battle cant includes specific phrases and mental exercises designed to anchor their consciousness in reality when confronted with the impossible geometries and paradoxical logic that characterize Tzeentchian manifestations. The equipment employed by Grey Knights reflects centuries of accumulated experience in fighting demonic entities, each piece of wargear crafted specifically to exploit the weaknesses of warp-spawned creatures. Their nemesis force weapons channel psychic energy through blessed silver and sanctified adamantium, creating blades that can wound entities that exist partially outside normal space-time. The force matrices embedded within these weapons allow Grey Knights to channel their psychic abilities with unprecedented precision, focusing their mental energies into attacks that target the fundamental structure of demonic manifestations rather than simply their physical forms. The Aegis armor worn by Grey Knights incorporates protective wards and psychic dampening fields that provide defense against the reality warping abilities employed by Tzeentchian demons. The intricate engravings that cover every surface of their power armor are not merely decorative, but serve as focusing arrays that channel and amplify the wearer's psychic abilities, while providing protection against mental intrusion and corruption. Each suit is individually crafted and blessed through rituals that can take months to complete, the armor becoming attuned to its wearer's psychic signature in ways that make it nearly impossible for demonic entities to subvert or corrupt. The tactical doctrines developed by the Grey Knights for combating Tzeentchian forces emphasize rapid deployment and decisive action, recognizing that prolonged exposure to the architect of fate's servants increases the risk of corruption through their reality warping abilities. Strike forces are organized to minimize the time spent in combat with entities like Lords of Change, their assault patterns designed to overwhelm demonic defenses before the creatures can deploy their full range of psychic abilities. The chapter's librarians coordinate these attacks through psychic battle cant that allows real-time tactical adjustments while maintaining the mental barriers necessary to resist demonic influence. The Grey Knight's understanding of Tzeentchian psychology allows them to exploit the architect of fate's own nature against his servants. The compulsive need for complexity and scheming that characterizes Tzeentch's demons can be turned against them through tactics that appear to offer opportunities for elaborate manipulation, but actually lead the creatures into carefully prepared traps. Grey Knight's commanders learn to present their forces in ways that suggest vulnerability to psychic attack while concealing their true capabilities until the moment of engagement, using the demons' overconfidence in their manipulative abilities to create tactical advantages. The chapter's approach to investigating Tzeentchian cults demonstrates their recognition that conventional interrogation and investigation techniques prove inadequate when dealing with corruption that operates through subtle influence and gradual indoctrination. Grey Knights Justicars receive training in psychological analysis that allows them to identify the signs of Tzeentchian corruption even when the subjects themselves remain unaware of their compromised state. The questioning techniques employed during these investigations are designed to reveal patterns of thought and decision-making that indicate external influence, using the subject's own responses to map the structure of the corruption that has affected them. The Ordo Malleus represents the branch of the Imperial Inquisition specifically tasked with combating demonic threats throughout the galaxy, their inquisitors possessing the authority and resources necessary to investigate and purge chaos corruption at its source. Unlike other Ordos that focus on specific categories of threat, the Ordo Malleus must contend with enemies whose very nature transcends normal understanding of reality and causation. The inquisitors of this Ordo undergo training that encompasses not only traditional investigative techniques, but also advanced studies in demonology, warp theory, and the psychological patterns that characterize different forms of chaos corruption. The detection of Tzeentchian influence presents unique challenges that require investigative approaches fundamentally different from those used to identify other forms of heresy. Where Cornate cults leave obvious traces of violence and bloodshed, and Nurgle's followers create visible signs of decay and corruption, Tzeentch's servants often appear as model imperial citizens whose only crime lies in their gradual drift toward forbidden knowledge and dangerous innovation. Ordo Malleus Inquisitors learn to recognize the subtle patterns that indicate Tzeentchian corruption, the gradual shift in an organization's priorities, the introduction of seemingly beneficial innovations that contain hidden flaws, and the development of communication networks that bypass official channels while appearing to serve legitimate purposes. The investigation techniques employed by the Ordo Malleus when pursuing Tzeentchian cults emphasize patience and systematic analysis over direct confrontation, recognizing that premature action can alert the cult to official interest while failing to identify the full extent of their network. Inquisitors assigned to these cases often spend years building comprehensive maps of cult membership and activities, using surveillance techniques that range from conventional observation to psychic monitoring and the deployment of specially trained agents who can infiltrate suspect organizations without arousing suspicion. The resources available to Ordo Malleus Inquisitors reflect the Imperium's recognition that combating demonic threats requires capabilities that exceed those possessed by conventional military and law enforcement agencies. Inquisitors investigating Tzeentchian activities have access to specialized equipment designed to detect psychic manipulation, probability distortion, and the presence of warp-tainted materials or individuals. Auspex scanners modified with psychically sensitive components can identify locations where reality has been subtly altered by demonic influence, while cogitator systems equipped with pattern recognition algorithms can detect the complex relationships that characterize Tzeentchian conspiracy networks. The interrogation facilities maintained by the Ordo Malleus incorporate both physical and psychic containment systems designed to prevent captured cultists from communicating with their controllers or activating predetermined responses that might compromise the investigation. These installations include null chambers that suppress psychic activity, preventing telepathic communication or psychic suicide attempts, while specialized interrogation techniques are employed to extract information from subjects whose minds may have been conditioned to resist conventional questioning methods. The purging of Tzeentchian cults requires coordination between multiple Imperial agencies, as the sophisticated nature of these organizations means that eliminating visible members may have little impact on their overall capabilities if deeper networks remain intact. Ordo Malleus Inquisitors work closely with Adeptus Arbites, planetary defense forces, and local Imperial Guard units to conduct simultaneous operations across multiple locations, preventing cult members from warning each other or activating contingency plans that might allow key figures to escape. The timing of these purges must account for the complex relationships between different cult cells, ensuring that the elimination of one group does not trigger responses that compromise operations against others. The psychological profile analysis conducted by Ordo Malleus specialists reveals patterns that distinguish Tzeentchian cultists from other categories of heretic, information that proves crucial for developing effective counter strategies. Unlike the obvious madness that characterizes followers of other chaos gods, Tzeentch cultists often retain their sanity and professional competence throughout their corruption, making them much more difficult to identify through behavioral observation. The corruption manifests as gradual shifts in priorities and methodologies, rather than dramatic personality changes, requiring investigators to focus on patterns of decision-making and resource allocation, rather than obvious signs of mental instability. The Eldar race represents one of the most sophisticated opponents of Tzeentchian schemes, their ancient wisdom and psychic capabilities providing them with insights into the Architect of Fate's methods that few other races possess. The Farseers who guide Eldar society through their prophetic abilities understand the nature of fate and probability in ways that allow them to perceive and counter many of Tzeentch's manipulations before they can achieve their intended effects. This opposition operates on multiple levels, from direct military intervention against chaos forces to subtle manipulations of probability that redirect Tzeentchian schemes toward failure or irrelevance. The Eldar approach to combating Tzeentch reflects their understanding that the Architect of Fate's power derives from his ability to manipulate the connections between events across time and space. Farseer councils employ divination techniques that map these causal relationships, identifying the points where intervention can disrupt entire chains of manipulation with minimal direct action. A single assassination, carefully timed and precisely executed, might prevent the corruption of a planetary governor whose fall would have led to the compromise of an entire sector. The redirection of a single supply convoy could deny Tzeentchian cultists access to resources that would have enabled a major ritual, causing years of preparation to come to nothing. The Craftworlds maintain extensive intelligence networks that monitor chaos activity throughout the galaxy, their agents gathering information about Tzeentchian schemes through methods that range from conventional espionage to psychic surveillance and the analysis of probability currents. These networks provide early warning of developing threats while identifying opportunities for intervention that can achieve maximum impact with minimum risk to Eldar forces. The information gathered through these efforts is analyzed by specialist seers, whose training focuses specifically on understanding Tzeentchian patterns of operation and the psychological profiles of his mortal servants. The military forces deployed by the Eldar against Tzeentchian threats reflect their preference for precision and mobility over brute force, recognizing that the Architect of Fate's servants are most vulnerable when denied the time necessary to implement their complex schemes. Aspect warriors trained in the path of the swooping hawk excel at rapid deployment operations that can strike at cult gatherings and ritual sites before the participants can complete their ceremonies. The hit-and-run tactics employed by these forces are designed to create maximum disruption while avoiding prolonged engagement that might allow Tzeentchian demons to deploy their reality-warping abilities effectively. The protection of the Black Library represents one of the Eldar's most crucial responsibilities in their ongoing war against chaos, as this repository contains knowledge that could prove catastrophically dangerous if it fell into the wrong hands. The library exists within the webway, protected by defenses that combine physical barriers with psychic wards and probability manipulations that make it nearly impossible for unauthorized individuals to locate or access. The Harlequins who serve as the library's primary guardians possess unique capabilities that make them ideally suited for this role. Their mastery of illusion and misdirection allowing them to confuse and redirect potential intruders, while their deep understanding of chaos psychology enables them to anticipate and counter various infiltration attempts. The defenses surrounding the Black Library operate on multiple levels that reflect the sophisticated understanding of warp dynamics possessed by their Eldar creators. Physical barriers constructed from psychically active materials can shift their configuration in response to different types of threat, while automated defense systems employ weapons that target not just the intruder's body, but their psychic essence and connection to the warp. The most sophisticated defenses operate through manipulation of probability and causation, creating zones where the normal relationships between cause and effect become unreliable, making it nearly impossible for intruders to plan or execute coherent strategies. The knowledge contained within the Black Library includes detailed information about the nature and capabilities of all four Chaos Gods, but the sections dealing with Tzeentch receive particular attention from the library's guardians due to the Architect of Fate's repeated attempts to gain access to this information. The texts describe not only Tzeentch's methods and objectives, but also the specific techniques that can be used to counter his influence and disrupt his schemes. This knowledge proves invaluable for Eldar Farseers, who must devise strategies for protecting their people from Tzeentchian corruption, while avoiding the trap of becoming corrupted themselves through excessive study of chaos lore. The Adeptus Custodes represents the Emperor's personal guard and the ultimate defenders of Terra against all forms of threat, their role in opposing Tzeentchian schemes, focusing primarily on protecting the Emperor himself from the Architect of Fate's attempts at corruption and manipulation. The Custodians possess capabilities that exceed those of Space Marines in every measurable category. Their enhanced physiology and training making them uniquely qualified to operate in environments where reality itself becomes unreliable. Their understanding of the Emperor's true nature and the forces that threaten him provides them with insights into Tzeentchian objectives that are unavailable to other Imperial agencies. The webway breach beneath the Imperial Palace represents one of the most significant ongoing threats to Terra and the Emperor, creating a permanent gateway through which demonic forces can launch attacks against the very heart of the Imperium. The custodians tasked with containing this breach face enemies that include some of Tzeentch's most powerful servants, entities whose reality warping abilities make conventional military tactics ineffective. The defense of the breach requires constant vigilance and the deployment of specialized equipment designed to function in environments where the normal laws of physics become unreliable. The custodians' approach to combating Tzeentchian demons within the webway tunnels emphasizes the use of ancient technologies and techniques that predate the current understanding of chaos corruption. Their weapons incorporate archaeotech components that channel the Emperor's own psychic power, creating effects that can wound or banish entities that exist partially outside normal space-time. The armor worn by custodians operating in these areas includes systems that maintain local reality stability, preventing the kind of probability manipulation and causal distortion that Tzeentchian demons employ as their primary weapons. The intelligence gathered by the custodians through their operations in the webway provides crucial insights into Tzeentchian objectives and methods that prove valuable for other Imperial agencies tasked with combating chaos corruption. The patterns of demonic activity observed within the breach reveal information about larger schemes developing throughout the galaxy, while the techniques employed by captured or destroyed entities provide data that can be used to develop more effective countermeasures. This intelligence is shared with selected members of the Ordo Malleus and the Grey Knights through carefully controlled channels that prevent the information from being compromised by the very corruption it describes. The coordination between these various anti-Tzeentchian forces requires communication networks and command structures that can operate effectively despite the Architect of Fate's attempts to infiltrate and subvert Imperial institutions. The Grey Knights, Ordo Malleus, Eldar Farseers, and Adeptus Custodes maintain liaison protocols that allow for rapid information sharing and coordinated responses to major threats, while minimizing the risk of compromise through Tzeentchian infiltration. These relationships often operate through informal channels that bypass official Imperial hierarchy, recognizing that conventional command structures may themselves be compromised by the very corruption they are meant to combat. The development of new technologies and techniques for combating Tzeentchian threats continues to evolve as these organizations learn from each encounter with the Architect of Fate's servants. Research programs conducted by the Grey Knights and Ordo Malleus focus on understanding the fundamental principles that govern demonic manifestation and corruption, seeking to develop more effective weapons and protective systems. The Eldar contribute their ancient knowledge of warp dynamics and probability manipulation, while the custodians provide access to archaeotech systems, whose capabilities often exceed those of more modern Imperial technology. The psychological warfare aspects of combating Tzeentch require specialized training that goes beyond conventional military preparation, as the Architect of Fate's servants employ corruption techniques that target the mind and soul rather than just the body. Personnel assigned to anti-Tzeentchian operations receive conditioning designed to strengthen their mental defenses against psychic manipulation, while providing them with the intellectual tools necessary to recognize and resist subtle forms of corruption. This training includes exposure to controlled examples of Tzeentchian influence under carefully monitored conditions, allowing individuals to develop immunity to certain forms of manipulation through gradual exposure and guided analysis. The psychic disciplines wielded by Tzeentch's mortal servants represent the most sophisticated and dangerous applications of warp manipulation known to exist within the galaxy. Unlike the crude psychic abilities manifested by untrained psychers or the ritualistic practices of other chaos cults, the discipline of Tzeentch encompasses a comprehensive system of mental techniques that allow practitioners to reshape reality according to their will. These powers extend far beyond simple telekinesis or telepathy, encompassing abilities that manipulate the fundamental forces governing time, space, probability, and causation itself. The foundation of Tzeentchian sorcery lies in the understanding that reality exists as a malleable construct that can be altered through the proper application of will and knowledge. Practitioners learn to perceive the underlying mathematical relationships that govern physical phenomena, recognizing that these patterns can be modified through psychic intervention to produce effects that appear to violate natural law. A sorcerer who has mastered the basic principles can transmute lead into gold not through alchemical processes, but by adjusting the atomic structure of matter through direct manipulation of probability fields that determine particle behavior. Precognition represents one of the most valued abilities within the Tzeentchian arsenal, allowing practitioners to perceive potential futures with varying degrees of accuracy and detail. The technique requires the sorcerer to project their consciousness forward through time while maintaining sufficient connection to the present to avoid becoming lost in temporal paradoxes. Novice practitioners typically achieve glimpses of events minutes or hours in the future, while masters of the discipline can perceive probability cascades that extend across decades or centuries. The visions received through precognitive techniques appear as overlapping images that represent different potential outcomes, requiring significant skill to interpret correctly and distinguish between likely futures and mere possibilities. The application of precognitive abilities in tactical situations provides enormous advantages to Tzeentchian forces, as commanders who can anticipate enemy movements and decisions can position their troops to exploit weaknesses before those weaknesses become apparent through conventional observation. A sorcerer leading a warband might perceive that an Imperial Guard regiment will attempt a flanking maneuver 3 hours before the enemy commander issues the relevant orders, allowing the Chaos forces to prepare countermeasures or redirect the attack toward more vulnerable targets. The accuracy of these predictions depends on the sorcerer's skill level and the complexity of the situation being observed, with simple tactical scenarios proving easier to predict than complex political or strategic developments. Transmutation abilities allow Tzeentchian sorcerers to alter the fundamental properties of matter and energy through direct psychic manipulation, bypassing the normal physical and chemical processes that govern such changes. The technique operates by identifying the quantum probability fields that determine the behavior of subatomic particles and adjusting these fields to produce desired outcomes. A skilled practitioner can transform solid rock into flowing water, convert breathable atmosphere into toxic gas, or change the molecular structure of metal to make it brittle and easily shattered. The scope of possible transmutations is limited primarily by the sorcerer's understanding of the target material and their ability to maintain the complex mental calculations required to sustain the change. The most advanced transmutation techniques allow sorcerers to alter living tissue in ways that produce beneficial mutations or correct unwanted changes. A practitioner who has mastered these abilities can accelerate healing processes, enhance physical capabilities, or even reverse the effects of aging through careful manipulation of cellular structure and genetic expression. However, these applications require enormous precision and carry significant risks, as errors in the transmutation process can produce catastrophic mutations or cellular breakdown that proves fatal to the subject. The safest applications focus on non-living materials or simple biological modifications that do not require extensive alterations to existing systems. Reality manipulation represents the pinnacle of Tzeentchian sorcery, encompassing techniques that allow practitioners to alter the fundamental laws governing local space-time through pure force of will. These abilities operate by identifying the conceptual frameworks that define how reality functions in specific locations and modifying these frameworks to produce desired effects. A master sorcerer might create zones where gravity operates in reverse, establish areas where time flows at different rates, or generate pockets of space where the normal relationship between cause and effect becomes unreliable. The implementation of reality manipulation requires extensive preparation and the expenditure of enormous psychic energy, making these techniques unsuitable for casual use or rapid deployment in combat situations. Most applications require the establishment of focusing arrays and protective circles that channel and contain the forces being manipulated, while the sorcerer must maintain perfect concentration throughout the process to prevent the altered reality from collapsing or expanding beyond the intended boundaries. The duration of reality manipulation effects varies based on the complexity of the changes and the amount of energy invested in their creation, with simple alterations lasting minutes or hours, while more comprehensive modifications might persist for days or weeks. The distinction between sanctioned psychers and sorcerers lies not merely in their training or official recognition, but in their fundamental approach to psychic phenomena and their relationship with the warp. Sanctioned psychers undergo rigorous conditioning designed to limit their abilities to specific, approved applications, while providing them with mental defenses against chaos corruption. Their training emphasizes discipline, restraint, and adherence to established protocols that minimize the risk of uncontrolled manifestations or demonic possession. The soul-binding ritual that creates sanctioned psychers establishes a direct connection to the Emperor's psychic presence, providing protection against warp-based attacks while limiting the practitioner's ability to explore forbidden techniques. Sorcerers, by contrast, pursue knowledge and power without regard for the restrictions imposed by imperial doctrine, their studies encompassing techniques and theories that sanctioned psychers are specifically trained to avoid. The corruption that transforms a sanctioned psycher into a sorcerer typically begins with exposure to forbidden texts or contact with entities that offer knowledge beyond what imperial training provides. The process often starts innocuously, with the psycher encountering information that appears to offer legitimate improvements to their abilities or solutions to problems they face in their official duties. The stages of fall from sanctioned psycher to chaos sorcerer follow predictable patterns that reflect the gradual nature of Tzeentchian corruption. The initial stage involves the questioning of established doctrine and the exploration of theoretical concepts that push the boundaries of approved psychic practice. A psycher might begin by experimenting with minor variations on sanctioned techniques, telling themselves that they are simply seeking to improve their effectiveness in service to the Emperor. These early experiments typically produce positive results that reinforce the psycher's belief that they are discovering legitimate improvements to imperial methodology. The second stage involves direct contact with forbidden knowledge through texts, artifacts, or entities that offer instruction in advanced techniques. The psycher begins to perceive the limitations of their imperial training as arbitrary restrictions that prevent them from achieving their full potential. The knowledge gained during this stage often comes with warnings about the dangers of proceeding further, but these cautions are typically dismissed as the product of ignorance or institutional prejudice, rather than genuine concern for the psycher's safety. The third stage marks the point of no return, as the psycher begins to actively seek out sources of forbidden knowledge and to experiment with techniques that clearly violate imperial doctrine. The corruption of their soul binding becomes apparent as their connection to the Emperor weakens and is gradually replaced by links to chaos entities that offer greater power in exchange for service. The psycher's personality begins to change as their priorities shift from service to the Imperium toward the pursuit of personal advancement and the acquisition of ever greater abilities. The final stage sees the complete transformation of the former sanctioned psycher into a full chaos sorcerer, their original loyalty and moral constraints replaced by devotion to their chaos patron and an obsessive desire for forbidden knowledge. The physical mutations that typically accompany this transformation serve as external markers of the internal corruption that has taken place, while the sorcerer's enhanced abilities demonstrate the power that can be gained through abandoning imperial restrictions. At this point, the individual represents a significant threat to imperial security and requires immediate elimination by specialized anti-chaos forces. Demonic possession represents one of the most dangerous applications of Tzeentchian sorcery, as it allows mortal practitioners to temporarily or permanently house demonic entities within their physical forms. The process requires extensive preparation and the establishment of specific conditions that weaken the barriers between real space and the warp, creating opportunities for demonic entities to manifest through mortal hosts. Unlike the crude possession techniques employed by followers of other chaos gods, Tzeentchian possession rituals emphasize control and mutual benefit rather than simple domination of the host by the demon. The preparation for controlled possession begins with the creation of psychic bonds between the sorcerer and the chosen demonic entity, establishing communication channels that allow negotiation of terms and conditions for the possession. These negotiations can extend over weeks or months, as both parties seek to maximize their benefits while minimizing their risks. The sorcerer gains access to the demon's supernatural abilities and knowledge, while the demon receives a stable anchor in real space that allows it to act without the constant expenditure of energy required to maintain independent manifestation. The ritual chamber used for possession ceremonies must be carefully prepared with protective circles and binding inscriptions that prevent the demon from exceeding the agreed upon limits of its influence over the host. The inscriptions serve as both containment measures and focusing, arrays that channel the energies involved in the possession process, while backup protocols ensure that the demon can be expelled if it attempts to violate the terms of the agreement. The physical preparation of the host involves fasting, meditation, and the consumption of substances that thin the barriers between their consciousness and the warp, making their body more receptive to demonic inhabitation. The possession process itself requires the sorcerer to voluntarily lower their psychic defenses while maintaining sufficient willpower to resist complete domination by the demon. The entity enters through established psychic channels, its presence initially manifesting as enhanced sensory perception and improved cognitive abilities. As the possession deepens, the host gains access to the demon's memories and knowledge, while their physical form may undergo temporary mutations that reflect the entity's nature. The most successful possessions achieve a state of symbiosis where both personalities remain distinct but cooperative, each contributing their unique capabilities to their shared goals. Summoning rituals allow Tzeentchian sorcerers to call forth demonic entities from the warp and bind them to service in real space, creating temporary allies whose supernatural abilities can be directed toward specific objectives. These ceremonies require extensive knowledge of demonic psychology and the specific names, symbols, and offerings that appeal to different categories of entity. The preparation phase involves the creation of summoning circles inscribed with mathematical formulae that describe the relationship between the summoner and the entity being called, while protective barriers prevent the demon from attacking the sorcerer or exceeding the bounds of its summoned manifestation. The complexity of summoning rituals varies dramatically based on the power level of the intended target, with lesser demons like pink horrors requiring relatively simple ceremonies, while greater demons such as Lords of Change demand elaborate preparations that may take months to complete properly. The ritual components include rare materials that serve as focusing elements for the summoning energies, offerings that demonstrate the summoner's respect for the entity being called, and binding materials that create physical anchors for the demon's presence in real space. The negotiation phase of the summoning process requires diplomatic skills that many sorcerers lack, as demonic entities possess alien psychology and motivations that do not always align with mortal objectives. The summoner must offer compensation that the demon finds acceptable while establishing clear limits on the entity's behavior and duration of service. Failure to properly structure these negotiations can result in the demon fulfilling the letter of its agreement while subverting its spirit, achieving its own goals at the summoner's expense or finding loopholes that allow it to cause more harm than benefit. The binding of Tzeentchian entities to serve mortal sorcerers represents a particularly sophisticated application of summoning techniques, as it creates permanent or semi-permanent relationships that provide ongoing access to demonic abilities without the need for repeated summoning ceremonies. The binding process requires the creation of physical objects that serve as prisons or anchors for the demon's essence, typically taking the form of weapons, armor, or jewelry that can be carried or worn by the sorcerer. These binding objects must be crafted from materials that can contain demonic energy while allowing the entity to manifest its abilities when called upon by its master. The most effective binding rituals establish relationships of mutual benefit where the demon gains advantages from its association with the mortal sorcerer while providing services that advance both their interests. A bound flamer might reside within a staff or weapon, providing enhanced offensive capabilities in exchange for regular opportunities to burn enemies and spread mutation. A bound horror could inhabit a piece of armor or jewelry, offering protection and advice while feeding on the psychic energy generated by the sorcerer's emotional responses to challenging situations. The creation of chaos artifacts represents one of the most dangerous and valuable applications of Tzeentchian sorcery, as these objects serve as permanent repositories of supernatural power that can be used by individuals who lack the knowledge or ability to perform the original rituals themselves. The crafting process requires extensive knowledge of materials science, psychic theory, and demonic psychology, as the artifact must be designed to channel specific types of energy while remaining stable enough for regular use. The most sophisticated artifacts incorporate multiple layers of enchantment that provide different abilities based on the wielder's skill level and the amount of energy invested in their activation. The materials used in artifact creation must possess natural affinity for psychic energy while maintaining sufficient structural integrity to withstand the stresses imposed by channeling supernatural forces. Rare metals and crystals that form near warp rifts or sites of significant psychic activity provide the best foundation for artifact construction, their atomic structure already altered by exposure to chaotic energies in ways that make them receptive to further modification. The shaping of these materials requires tools and techniques that go beyond conventional craftsmanship, incorporating psychic manipulation and ritualistic processes that imbue the raw materials with specific properties and capabilities. The inscription of control matrices and focusing arrays onto artifact surfaces requires knowledge of symbolic systems that bridge the gap between mathematical precision and mystical significance. These inscriptions serve multiple functions simultaneously, providing channels for energy flow, establishing limits on the artifact's capabilities, and creating interfaces that allow users to access different aspects of the object's power. The complexity of these inscriptions often exceeds the comprehension of the artifact's eventual users, requiring them to rely on intuitive understanding and trial and error experimentation to discover the full range of abilities available to them. Tomes of Forbidden Knowledge represent a specialized category of chaos artifact that focuses on the preservation and transmission of dangerous information rather than the direct application of supernatural power. These books serve as repositories for sorcerous techniques, demonic lore, and theoretical frameworks that would be too dangerous to store in conventional formats. The creation of such tomes requires the binding of psychic energy into the very substance of the pages and binding, creating books that can actively resist destruction, while ensuring that their contents remain accessible only to readers who possess the proper mental preparation and protective measures. The most dangerous forbidden tomes incorporate active defenses that protect them from unauthorized access while punishing those who attempt to read them without proper preparation. These defenses range from simple psychological effects that create feelings of unease or confusion in unprepared readers to more aggressive measures that can cause madness, mutation, or death in those who persist in their attempts to access forbidden knowledge. The books themselves may shift their contents based on the reader's level of corruption and understanding, presenting different information to different individuals while concealing their most dangerous secrets from those who lack the wisdom to use them safely. The dangers of accessing Tzeentchian lore extend far beyond the immediate risks of psychic backlash or demonic attention, encompassing long-term consequences that can affect the reader's sanity, soul, and fundamental relationship with reality. The knowledge contained within these sources often challenges basic assumptions about the nature of existence, presenting concepts that mortal minds struggle to comprehend without undergoing fundamental changes in their cognitive structure. Readers who successfully absorb this information find their perception of reality permanently altered, their understanding of causation and possibility expanded in ways that make it difficult to function within normal society. The progressive nature of Tzeentchian corruption means that exposure to forbidden knowledge creates an escalating cycle of curiosity and risk-taking that becomes increasingly difficult to resist. Each revelation raises new questions that can only be answered through access to even more dangerous sources, while the enhanced understanding gained through previous study makes the reader more capable of surviving exposure to increasingly hazardous materials. This progression often leads to the development of personal libraries and research collections that represent significant threats to imperial security, as corrupted scholars accumulate resources that could prove catastrophic if they fell into the wrong hands. The protection of individuals who must access Tzeentchian lore for legitimate purposes requires specialized techniques and equipment designed to minimize the risks of corruption while allowing sufficient exposure to accomplish necessary research objectives. Inquisitors and Grey Knights who study chaos materials employ mental conditioning techniques that create barriers between their core personality and the information they encounter, allowing them to process dangerous knowledge without allowing it to fundamentally alter their worldview or moral framework. Physical protections include psychic dampening fields that reduce the intensity of supernatural effects emanating from forbidden texts, while chemical treatments can alter brain chemistry in ways that provide temporary resistance to certain forms of mental corruption. The development of safe research protocols for studying Tzeentchian materials represents an ongoing challenge for imperial authorities, as the very nature of this knowledge makes it resistant to conventional containment measures. Research facilities must incorporate multiple layers of protection that address both the immediate dangers posed by individual artifacts and the cumulative risks created by housing large collections of forbidden materials in close proximity. The personnel assigned to these facilities require specialized training that goes beyond conventional security clearances, encompassing psychological conditioning, psychic defense techniques, and emergency protocols for dealing with containment failures or corruption incidents. The planet of the sorcerers serves as the primary stronghold of the Thousand Suns within the Eye of Terror, a world that exists simultaneously within the Crystal Labyrinth and as a twisted reflection of their lost homeworld Prospero. This demon world bears the architectural grandeur of ancient Prospero, but warped through the lens of Tzeentch's influence, its great pyramids and libraries constructed from crystallized time and impossibility rather than mere stone and metal. The planet's surface shifts constantly according to the collective will and emotional state of its inhabitants, with new structures manifesting when the Thousand Suns require them, while others fade into unreality when their purpose has been served. The central pyramid that dominates the planet's primary city houses Magnus the Red's throne room, and the command centers from which the Thousand Suns coordinate their operations throughout the galaxy. This massive structure reaches impossible heights, its apex disappearing into swirling clouds of psychic energy that connect directly to the deeper reaches of the Crystal Labyrinth. The pyramid's interior contains vast halls filled with scrying pools and divination chambers where the Legion's sorcerers monitor developments across real space, their enhanced perception allowing them to observe events on distant worlds and identify opportunities for intervention. The libraries that surround the central pyramid contain the accumulated knowledge of the Thousand Suns, their collections encompassing everything from the salvaged texts of Prospero to forbidden lore acquired through millennia of raids and expeditions. These repositories exist in a state of constant flux, their contents rearranging themselves according to the needs of their users, while new tomes appear as the Legion's sorcerers discover or create additional knowledge. The most dangerous sections remain sealed behind wards that require specific combinations of psychic keys to access, their contents deemed too hazardous for all but the most accomplished practitioners. The training grounds and ritual chambers scattered throughout the planet's cities provide facilities for the Legion's ongoing development of sorceress techniques and the instruction of new recruits drawn from captured psychers and corrupted scholars. These areas incorporate architectural elements that enhance psychic resonance while providing protection against the backlash effects that accompany advanced sorceress practice. The chambers themselves exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, allowing practitioners to experience different aspects of the same training exercise while minimizing the risk of catastrophic failure during experimental procedures. The planet's defensive systems reflect the sophisticated understanding of warfare that characterizes the Thousand Suns, incorporating both conventional military installations and exotic weapons that manipulate probability and causation to defeat attacking forces. Orbital defense platforms equipped with reality-warping cannons can alter the fundamental properties of incoming projectiles, transforming kinetic shells into harmless energy or redirecting missile strikes back toward their launchers. Ground-based installations project fields that create localized temporal distortions, causing attacking forces to experience time dilation effects that leave them vulnerable to counterattack, while their movements become predictably slow. The population of the planet of the sorcerers consists primarily of rubric marines and the surviving sorcerers who command them, but the world also hosts various demon entities that serve the Legion in different capacities. Horrors of Tzeentch inhabit the lower levels of the Great Pyramids, their ability to split and multiply making them ideal for maintaining the complex magical machinery that keeps the planet functioning. Flamers patrol the perimeter regions, their mutagenic fire serving as both a defensive measure and a means of testing visitors to determine their worthiness for admission to the planet's inner sanctums. The notable campaigns launched from the planet of the sorcerers demonstrate the Legion's evolution from a traditional space marine force into something far more dangerous and unpredictable. The 13th Black Crusade saw significant Thousand Suns participation, with Magnus personally leading several warbands in assaults on Imperial worlds that possessed libraries or research facilities containing knowledge relevant to his ongoing schemes. These attacks followed patterns that seemed random to Imperial defenders, but actually served carefully planned objectives related to the acquisition of specific texts and artifacts that would prove crucial for future operations. The Siege of Cadia during the 13th Black Crusade provided the Thousand Suns with opportunities to test their reality warping capabilities against some of the Imperium's most formidable defenses. Sorcerer-led warbands infiltrated the fortress world's outer defenses through dimensional rifts, their rubric marines advancing through corridors where the normal laws of physics had been suspended. The Legion's contribution to the siege focused on neutralizing the planet's psychic defenses and disrupting the communication networks that coordinated the Imperial response, their subtle approach proving more effective than the direct assaults favored by other traitor legions. The fall of Cadia and the subsequent opening of the Great Rift created conditions that the Thousand Suns had been preparing to exploit for millennia. The massive warp storm that split the galaxy in half provided unprecedented opportunities for the Legion to launch raids deep into Imperial territory, their knowledge of warp navigation allowing them to traverse the chaotic energies that blocked conventional travel. Sorcerer warbands emerged from the rift at locations throughout the Imperium Nihilus, their attacks targeting specific objectives that served Magnus's broader strategic goals rather than pursuing simple destruction or conquest. The Plague Wars that followed the Great Rift's opening saw the Thousand Suns operating in opposition to the forces of Nurgle, their fundamental nature as agents of change, bringing them into conflict with the Death Guards, attempts to establish permanent strongholds of decay and stagnation. These campaigns demonstrated the complex relationships between different Chaos factions, as the Thousand Suns found themselves simultaneously fighting against Imperial defenders and competing with other traitor legions for control of strategic objectives. The Legion's approach emphasized mobility and precision over the grinding attrition warfare favored by Nurgle's servants, their hit-and-run tactics allowing them to achieve their objectives while avoiding prolonged engagement with numerically superior forces. The Battle of the Fang represents one of the most significant conflicts between the Thousand Sons and their ancient enemies, the Space Wolves, since the burning of Prospero. This assault on the Space Wolves' fortress monastery on Fenris was planned and executed with characteristic Thousand Sons precision. The attack timed to coincide with the absence of most of the chapter's great companies on distant campaigns. Magnus himself led the assault, his presence on the battlefield serving both tactical and symbolic purposes as he sought to settle old scores while achieving specific strategic objectives related to the acquisition of Space Wolves' gene seed and the artifacts contained within the Fang's deepest vaults. The initial phases of the battle saw Thousand Sons forces materializing directly within the Fang's outer defenses through carefully prepared teleportation rituals, their sudden appearance catching the fortress's defenders off guard despite their constant vigilance. The attacking forces included not only rubric marines and sorcerers, but also demon engines and mutated creatures that had been specially prepared for the unique challenges posed by the Space Wolves' anti-psyker defenses. The Legion's battle plan accounted for the fortress's sophisticated ward systems and the presence of rune priests whose abilities could disrupt conventional sorceress attacks. The defenders of the Fang fought with the desperate courage characteristic of the Space Wolves, their knowledge of the fortress's layout and defensive systems allowing them to mount effective resistance despite being outnumbered and surprised. The battle raged through corridors and chambers that had remained unchanged since the fortress's construction, with both sides suffering heavy casualties as the conflict escalated from surgical strike to full-scale siege warfare. The Space Wolves' use of their own psykers and the fortress's ancient defensive systems created challenges that forced the Thousand Sons to adapt their tactics repeatedly throughout the engagement. Magnus's personal involvement in the battle demonstrated the enhanced capabilities he had gained through his transformation into a demon primarch, his reality warping abilities allowing him to tear through the Fang's defenses while engaging multiple opponents simultaneously. The Primarch's confrontation with the Great Wolf Herc Ironhelm became the focal point of the entire battle, their duel serving as both a test of personal combat skills and a struggle between opposing philosophies regarding the proper use of psychic power. The outcome of this confrontation would determine not only the fate of the Fang, but the broader strategic balance between the two legions. The resolution of the Battle of the Fang saw the Thousand Sons achieving their primary objectives, while suffering losses that would have been catastrophic for a conventional military force. The Legion's ability to replace destroyed rubric marines through sorceress means meant that their casualties were less significant than they appeared, while the knowledge and artifacts acquired during the assault provided resources that would prove valuable for future operations. The psychological impact of the attack on the Space Wolves exceeded its immediate tactical significance, demonstrating that even their most secure strongholds remained vulnerable to sufficiently sophisticated assault. The ongoing vendetta between the Thousand Sons and Space Wolves continues to manifest in conflicts throughout the galaxy, with both sides seeking opportunities to strike at their ancient enemies whenever circumstances permit. These engagements range from small-scale skirmishes between individual squads to major campaigns involving entire great companies and Thousand Sons warbands. The nature of this conflict has evolved over the millennia, with both sides developing specialized tactics and equipment designed specifically for fighting their traditional opponents. The Thousand Sons' approach to their war with the Space Wolves emphasizes the exploitation of their enemies' psychological vulnerabilities and tactical limitations, using their superior knowledge of warp phenomena to create situations where the Space Wolves' straightforward approach proves inadequate. Sorcerer commanders study the behavioral patterns and decision-making processes of individual Space Wolves leaders, developing strategies that manipulate their opponents into making predictable responses that can be countered with devastating effectiveness. The Legion's intelligence networks monitor Space Wolves' movements throughout the galaxy, identifying opportunities for ambush and assassination that serve both tactical and strategic purposes. The Space Wolves' response to Thousand Sons' activities demonstrates their evolution from the simple warriors they once were into a more sophisticated fighting force, capable of adapting to the unique challenges posed by their sorceress enemies. The chapter's rune priests have developed new techniques for detecting and countering Tzeentchian sorcery, while their tactical doctrines now include specific protocols for dealing with reality warping abilities and demon manifestations. The recruitment and training of new battle brothers emphasizes mental resilience and the ability to function effectively in environments where conventional logic and causation become unreliable. The Thousand Sons' involvement in the 13th Black Crusade extended beyond their participation in major battles to include numerous smaller operations that served Abaddon's strategic objectives while advancing their own agenda. Sorcerer warbands infiltrated Imperial worlds throughout the Cadian Gate region, their missions ranging from intelligence gathering and sabotage to the acquisition of specific artifacts and the corruption of key personnel. These operations demonstrated the Legion's evolution into a force that could operate effectively across multiple theaters simultaneously, their enhanced mobility and communication capabilities allowing them to coordinate complex multi-world campaigns. The Legion's contribution to the assault on the Blackstone Fortress of Cadia involved the deployment of their most advanced reality warping technologies, with Magnus personally leading rituals designed to destabilize the fortress's ancient defense systems. The Thousand Sons' understanding of archaeotech and their ability to manipulate probability allowed them to identify and exploit weaknesses in the fortress's structure that had remained hidden for millennia. The success of these operations played a crucial role in the eventual destruction of Cadia, though the full extent of the Legion's involvement remained hidden from most other participants in the Crusade. The opening of the Great Rift created opportunities for the Thousand Sons to pursue objectives that had been impossible while the galaxy remained relatively stable, their knowledge of warp phenomena allowing them to navigate the chaotic energies that made conventional travel impossible for most Imperial forces. The Legion's post-Rift campaigns have focused on the establishment of permanent strongholds in strategic locations throughout the Imperium Nihilus, their bases serving as launching points for raids into Imperial territory and research facilities for the study of phenomena unique to the Rift's chaotic environment. The Plague Wars saw the Thousand Sons operating in regions where the forces of Nurgle had established significant presence, creating complex three-way conflicts between Imperial defenders, Death Guard invaders, and Thousand Sons raiders. The Legion's approach to these campaigns emphasized the disruption of Nurgle's attempts to create permanent zones of decay and stagnation, their reality warping abilities allowing them to reverse or redirect the effects of plague and corruption. These operations often involved the use of transmutation sorcery to transform plague-infected regions into environments more suitable for Tzeentchian influence, creating areas where change and mutation replaced decay and death. The strategic objectives pursued by the Thousand Sons during the Plague Wars extended beyond simple opposition to Nurgle's forces to include the acquisition of knowledge about the interaction between different forms of chaos corruption. The Legion's sorcerers conducted extensive studies of plague-infected populations and environments, their research providing insights into the fundamental nature of chaos influence that proved valuable for developing new techniques and countermeasures. These studies also revealed opportunities for manipulating the conflict between different chaos factions to achieve outcomes that served Tzeentch's broader strategic goals. The Thousand Sons' current operations throughout the galaxy demonstrate their evolution into a force that operates according to principles fundamentally different from those governing conventional military organizations. Their campaigns serve multiple purposes simultaneously, with tactical objectives often concealing strategic goals that may not become apparent for decades or centuries. The Legion's ability to coordinate operations across vast distances and time scales makes them uniquely dangerous opponents whose true intentions remain hidden until their schemes reach fruition. The recruitment and training of new sorcerers from captured psychers and corrupted scholars provides the Thousand Sons with a constantly renewable source of specialized personnel, their numbers no longer limited by the constraints that affect conventional Space Marine chapters. The process of transforming Imperial Psychers into Thousand Sons sorcerers involves extensive indoctrination and psychic conditioning that erases their previous loyalties while implanting the knowledge and motivations necessary for service to Magnus and Tzeentch. These new recruits often prove more fanatically devoted than the original Legion members, their corruption having been achieved through careful manipulation rather than the traumatic experiences that shaped the survivors of Prospero. The technological capabilities of the modern Thousand Sons reflect their access to both advanced Imperial systems and exotic technologies developed through sorceress research, creating a unique synthesis of conventional and supernatural capabilities. Their ships incorporate reality warping engines that allow travel through regions of space where conventional warp drives would fail, while their weapon systems can alter the fundamental properties of their targets to achieve effects impossible through normal ballistic or energy weapons. The maintenance and operation of these systems requires personnel with both technical expertise and sorceress ability, creating a warrior scholar class that embodies the Legion's evolution from simple space marines into something entirely new. The opening of the Great Rift fundamentally altered the balance of power throughout the galaxy, creating conditions that have allowed Tzeentch's influence to expand beyond anything previously achieved during the 10 millennia since the Horus Heresy. The massive warp storm that now bisects the galaxy has weakened the barriers between real space and the immaterium across vast regions, creating opportunities for demonic manifestation and sorceress manipulation that were impossible under the previous cosmic order. The Architect of Fate had been positioning his forces and preparing his schemes for precisely such an eventuality, his long-term planning allowing him to exploit the chaos immediately while other powers struggled to adapt to the new reality. The increased demon activity observed throughout both sides of the divided galaxy reflects Tzeentch's enhanced ability to project his influence into real space through the weakened warp barriers. Horrors of Tzeentch now manifest spontaneously in locations where significant psychic events occur, their appearances often coinciding with moments of crucial decision-making by Imperial officials or the discovery of forbidden knowledge by curious scholars. These manifestations rarely involve direct combat, instead focusing on the corruption of key individuals and the manipulation of local events to serve larger strategic purposes. Flamers emerge from the shadows of Forge Worlds, where tech priests conduct research that pushes the boundaries of orthodox doctrine, their mutagenic flames transforming not just flesh, but the fundamental nature of the technologies being developed. Lords of Change have begun appearing on battlefields throughout the Imperium Nihilus with unprecedented frequency, their reality warping abilities allowing them to coordinate multiple operations simultaneously while remaining partially phased out of normal space-time. These greater demons no longer require elaborate summoning rituals to manifest, the weakened barriers allowing them to slip through dimensional cracks created by intense emotional states or psychic disturbances. Their presence on contested worlds creates tactical situations that Imperial commanders struggle to comprehend, as conventional military doctrine proves inadequate against enemies who can alter probability, manipulate causation, and reshape local reality according to their will. The Thousand Sons under Magnus, the Red, have emerged as one of the most active traitor legions in the post-Rift galaxy, their mastery of warp navigation allowing them to traverse the chaotic energies that block conventional travel for most Imperial forces. The Crimson King has established a network of strongholds throughout the Imperium Nihilus, each serving as both a base of operations and a research facility where his sorcerers study the unique phenomena created by the Great Rift. These installations incorporate architectural elements that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their structures designed to channel and focus the chaotic energies that permeate the region. Magnus's current strategic objectives extend far beyond simple conquest or destruction, encompassing long-term goals that reflect his transformation from loyal Primarch into Demon Prince of Tzeentch. The Crimson King seeks to establish permanent zones of controlled mutation and change throughout Imperial space, regions where the normal laws of physics become malleable and the boundaries between thought and reality break down. These areas serve as testing grounds for advanced sorceress techniques while providing recruitment centers where imperial citizens can be gradually corrupted and transformed into servants of the architect of fate. The planet of the sorcerers has undergone significant expansion since the Great Rift's opening, with new pyramids and research complexes manifesting to accommodate the Legion's increased activities, and the influx of captured psychers being processed for conversion into Thousand Sun sorcerers. The world's connection to the Crystal Labyrinth has strengthened, allowing more direct communication with Tzeentch himself and providing access to knowledge that was previously beyond the reach of mortal minds. The libraries that cover the planet's surface now contain texts that describe events yet to occur alongside historical records and theoretical treatises, their contents shifting to provide relevant information for whatever research projects currently occupy the Legion's attention. Ahriman's continued quest for the Black Library has evolved into something approaching an obsession that drives him to increasingly desperate measures as he seeks to undo the consequences of his greatest failure. The chief librarian's exile from the planet of the sorcerers has paradoxically increased his effectiveness as an agent of change, his separation from Magnus's direct control allowing him to pursue objectives that serve Tzeentch's purposes while appearing to advance his own personal agenda. The warbands that follow Ahriman have become some of the most feared raiders in the galaxy, their strikes targeting Eldar craftworlds, Imperial research facilities, and ancient ruins that might contain clues about the Black Library's location or the means to access it. The rubric Marines that serve under Ahriman have proven remarkably effective in the post-Rift environment, their immunity to conventional weapons and environmental hazards allowing them to operate in regions where living warriors would quickly succumb to radiation, toxic atmospheres, or the reality warping effects of warp storms. These dust-filled automatons advance through battlefields where the very air burns with mutagenic energy, their empty armor providing perfect protection against corruption, while their retained combat skills make them formidable opponents for any force that attempts to stop them. The psychological impact of facing enemies who cannot be reasoned with, bargained with, or intimidated has proven as valuable as their tactical capabilities. Ahriman's most recent attempts to breach the Black Library have involved increasingly sophisticated approaches that demonstrate his growing understanding of Eldar psychology and the nature of the webway itself, rather than relying on brute force assaults that can be detected and countered by the library's guardians. The chief librarian has begun employing subtle infiltration techniques that exploit the complex relationships between different Eldar factions. His agents work to manipulate craftworld politics and Harlequin performances, creating situations where the library's defenses must be temporarily lowered to address more immediate threats. The emergence of new Tzeentchian cults throughout the Imperium has accelerated dramatically since the Great Rift's opening, the weakened psychic barriers making it easier for the Architect of Fate's influence to reach potential converts across vast distances. These organizations no longer require the elaborate recruitment and indoctrination processes that characterized pre-Rift cults, as the ambient warp energy, now saturating many regions, creates spontaneous awakenings and revelations that guide individuals towards Tzeentchian worship. Professional associations, academic institutions, and administrative departments find themselves gradually transformed as key members experience visions and insights that redirect their activities toward goals that serve the Architect of Fate's purposes. The technological implications of increased Tzeentchian activity have created particular concerns for the Adeptus Mechanicus, as Forge worlds throughout the galaxy report unprecedented rates of innovation and discovery, accompanied by equally unprecedented rates of catastrophic failure and corruption. Tech priests who once adhered strictly to established patterns now find themselves compelled to experiment with new configurations and theoretical frameworks, their research producing remarkable breakthroughs alongside dangerous anomalies that threaten the stability of entire industrial complexes. The machine cult's traditional emphasis on maintaining ancient knowledge conflicts with the irresistible urge toward innovation that affects increasing numbers of their personnel. The Indomitus Crusade has encountered Tzeentchian forces throughout its advance across the Imperium Nihilus, these engagements revealing new tactical challenges that require constant adaptation of Imperial doctrine and strategy. Primarch Robute Guilliman's forces have faced enemies who can alter the fundamental properties of their weapons and equipment, transform battlefield terrain in real time, and coordinate attacks across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Ultramarines and their successor chapters have been forced to develop new combat protocols that account for opponents whose capabilities transcend conventional understanding of warfare. The role of Tzeentch in the current galactic conflict extends beyond direct military intervention to encompass the manipulation of information and communication networks that coordinate Imperial responses to various threats. Chaos agents embedded within the Adeptus Administratum have proven particularly effective at creating confusion and misdirection, their alterations to supply requisitions and troop deployment orders creating cascading failures that affect entire campaign theaters. The complexity of Imperial bureaucracy provides numerous opportunities for subtle sabotage that can achieve strategic objectives without requiring direct confrontation with loyalist forces. The Grey Knights have reported a significant increase in demon manifestations requiring their intervention, with Tzeentchian entities accounting for a disproportionate number of these incidents. The chapter's fortress monastery on Titan has been expanded to accommodate additional training facilities and research laboratories dedicated to understanding the new forms of corruption emerging in the post-Rift galaxy. The Grey Knight's traditional methods of combating demonic threats have required modification to address enemies whose reality-warping abilities operate on scales previously thought impossible for manifestations in real space. The Ordo Malleus has established new protocols for investigating suspected Tzeentchian activity, recognizing that conventional investigation techniques prove inadequate when dealing with corruption that can alter evidence, manipulate witnesses, and create false memories in investigators themselves. Inquisitors assigned to these cases now operate in teams designed to provide mutual verification and protection against psychic manipulation, their procedures incorporating multiple redundant checks to ensure that their findings reflect actual events rather than implanted suggestions or altered perceptions. The Eldar response to increased Tzeentchian activity has involved unprecedented cooperation between different craftworlds and Harlequin troops, their combined efforts focused on protecting the Black Library and countering the Architect of Fate's attempts to access forbidden knowledge. Farseer councils throughout the galaxy have reported visions of potential futures where Tzeentch achieves objectives that would fundamentally alter the nature of reality itself. These prophecies driving coordinated efforts to prevent specific events and manipulate probability currents to favor outcomes that preserve the current cosmic order. The nature of Tzeentch's ultimate goals remains a subject of intense speculation among those few individuals with sufficient knowledge and clearance to contemplate such matters. The Architect of Fate's actions suggest objectives that extend far beyond simple conquest or destruction, encompassing transformations that would affect the fundamental nature of existence throughout the galaxy. Some theories propose that Tzeentch seeks to merge real space with the warp entirely, creating a universe where thought and reality become indistinguishable, and where change occurs according to pure will rather than physical law. Others suggest that his goal involves the achievement of perfect knowledge and understanding, a state where all possibilities exist simultaneously, and where the distinction between past, present, and future becomes meaningless. The grand design that encompasses all of Tzeentch's schemes appears to operate on timescales that dwarf mortal comprehension, with individual campaigns and conflicts serving as components in a pattern whose ultimate purpose may not become clear for millennia. The opening of the Great Rift represents a significant milestone in this design, creating conditions that allow for accelerated progress toward whatever ultimate objective drives the Architect of Fate's endless scheming. The weakened barriers between dimensions provide opportunities for interventions that were previously impossible, while the chaos and confusion generated by the galaxy's division create cover for operations that might otherwise attract unwanted attention. The eternal war between order and change that defines Tzeentch's relationship with the galaxy continues to evolve as new factors emerge and existing powers adapt to changing circumstances. The Imperium's efforts to restore stability and unity face constant subversion from agents who work to ensure that every solution creates new problems and every victory contains the seeds of future defeat. The balance between these opposing forces remains precarious, with small actions potentially triggering cascading changes that could reshape the entire galactic order. The future development of Tzeentchian influence depends largely on the success or failure of current schemes that remain in progress throughout the galaxy. Ahriman's quest for the Black Library could provide access to knowledge that would exponentially increase the Architect of Fate's capabilities, while the continued expansion of Magnus's strongholds creates permanent footholds for chaos influence in regions previously under Imperial control. The ongoing corruption of key Imperial institutions threatens to create systemic failures that could cripple the Imperium's ability to respond effectively to external threats, while the proliferation of Tzeentchian cults ensures a steady supply of willing servants to carry out the Architect of Fate's will. The transformation of human civilization under Tzeentchian influence represents perhaps the most significant long-term threat facing the galaxy, as the gradual corruption of knowledge, technology, and social structures could fundamentally alter what it means to be human. The species that emerges from this process might retain the physical form and basic psychology of humanity, while possessing capabilities and motivations that would be utterly alien to their ancestors. This evolutionary pressure operates through mechanisms so subtle that most of its victims remain unaware of the changes occurring within themselves and their society. As the 42nd millennium progresses, the Architect of Fate's influence continues to grow stronger, while his schemes become ever more complex and far-reaching. The Great Rift has provided opportunities that Tzeentch has been preparing to exploit for 10,000 years, his patience finally rewarded with conditions that allow for unprecedented expansion of chaos influence throughout the galaxy. The eternal dance between hope and despair, ambition and corruption, knowledge and madness continues to play out on countless worlds as mortals struggle against forces they cannot fully comprehend or resist. The ultimate outcome of this cosmic struggle remains uncertain, its resolution dependent on choices yet to be made and events yet to unfold. What remains clear is that Tzeentch's influence will continue to shape the galaxy's destiny through subtle manipulation and gradual corruption, his schemes advancing regardless of temporary setbacks or apparent defeats. The Architect of Fate embodies change itself, and in a universe where stagnation means death, his victory may be as inevitable as the passage of time itself. The only constant in this ever-shifting cosmos is change, and change, above all else, serves the will of Tzeentch.